Stop, Friendly Fire. Chapter 24-25. Chapter 24. Operation. Bro. Why are you there? As expected. Impressive, very impressive. You're too kind. Shin Woo was meeting with Count, or who used to be, Nelopa, the lord of the satellite city, Kadinan, in a reception room. He was like a mummy who was all skin and bones, and according to Shin Woo's assessment, his name showed up as LV6 Undead Commander. He was already well aware that the higher leveled the undead, the more likely they were to not be bound by the form of a mere skeleton or zombie, so he wasn't very surprised by it. At the same time, he could easily tell that the Lord's intellect was higher than a normal undead as well. Ahem, is Marquis Setapin doing well? I have not been in contact with him, as it has been some time since he left his estate, but there are trustworthy knights by his side. Marquis Setapin's knights are renowned for their valor. Indeed, I had thought he would pass on all of his forces along with his estate, but to think that he had kept people like you by his side, what a sly old fox. Ahem, he's a powerful man. The undead were truly mysterious. Even if the undead possessed a similar level of intellect, when thrust into a combat scenario, several undead recklessly threw themselves into the fight. On the other hand, if they met other undead, and remembered their status when they were alive, they would act the part. There was an extremely thin line between insanity and normalcy for them. Only by understanding and arbitrating between that line would one be able to command them. For the past half-year, Shin Woo had encountered countless undead and had roughly been able to ascertain how to do this. But, is it really all right for you to help us? The Empire is in danger. Must I say anything else? You're right, absolutely right. You truly are extraordinary. That sense that allowed him to turn the conversation to the present situation, regardless of what the other was saying. He didn't know how he felt about Marquis Setapin, but now wasn't the time for Shin Woo to be worrying about something like that. As he thought, because of his statement advocating their cause, the undead commander, Count Nelopa, nodded his head in satisfaction. Then, could I ask you to do something? Since surveillance has been tough with just the knights we have. Of course, please do. And thus, Shin Woo much too casually and successfully infiltrated the city, Kadinan. The Lord didn't call one of the 12 generals. Shin Woo had entered the city, and they got the opportunity to scout out the area all at once. Jin was speechless as he saw Shin Woo march out of the reception area, as Jin obviously couldn't go in. Where the level 6 undead lord, the knight leader, a level 5 elder knight, as well as undead wizards resided. You're really nice. Then, shall we begin? Now, Operation Bro. Why are you there? Had begun in earnest. Shin Woo volunteered to patrol the outskirts so that he would avoid the Lord's suspicion. He pricked his ears and activated his mana senses, and then began patrolling his allotted area. Sir Seta, thank you for all your hard work. You're working hard as well. Are you on your way back from patrolling? That's correct. I was patrolling an important, protected area. Hundreds of knights go through dozens of routes in order to patrol so that there's no gap in our defenses. Impressive, and in the process, Shin Woo got closer to the other knights, and obviously acquired some information as well. For reference, they were telling him about the protected area. All the knights that had participated in human testing were buried there. Your horse is quite splendid, Sir Seta. Haha, thanks. You're a full-fledged knight as well, don't you have a horse as well? For some reason, all of the living horses in the city died. There are countless knights in the city without a horse. To think that all of the horses had died. There should only be dead horses in the Empire by now, is what he thought, yet Shin Woo didn't utter those words. How unfortunate. If I have the chance, I'll find a good horse for you. Thank you very much. There are 2 over here, and it looks like they're the only 3 disguised on the western outskirts, but there's actually one more hiding there as well. Though they were all undead, the dead in Kadinan, and especially the knights, trusted Shin Woo, as he emphasized loyalty to the Empire. The most important virtue for a knight within the Empire was strength, while the second most important virtue was loyalty. It seems that the north side's defense isn't up to par. Shouldn't we adjust the patrol route a bit? Moreover, Shin Woo made it seem like he was concerned about the defense of the city and their patrols, while in actuality, he was fishing for information. He acted like he actually had some recommendations for them, so the undead didn't even suspect Shin Woo in the slightest. There was no way for them to be suspicious of him. You truly are perceptive, Sir Seta. However, there's a hidden magic trap over there, so, as I suspected, as I thought, Kadinan is truly an impressive city. Okay, I wondered if they knew about it, but it seems like these guys really don't know that their magic trap is broken and still think it's working. If that's the case, then I can say that there are really no reserve troops over there. Shin Woo enthusiastically continued patrolling and collecting information. As a result, he figured out their patrol routes, the scope of the patrol, when they changed shifts, and even the route by which they were deployed and returned. It only took him a couple of days to successfully figure this all out, and organize the information in his head such that it was much simpler. Good, then we should. How the hell did you get such detailed information? Jin, who had definitely been with Shin Woo at every moment, watched as Shin Woo organized the information on paper. He started with the outskirts and their complicated patrolling routes. Once he saw Shin Woo detailing where and when the knights were stationed at each and every moment, he couldn't understand how he had come up with it all. However, once he looked over the details, he couldn't deny that it looked accurate. This is way too easy. We can already infiltrate the facility, huh? Then let's get rid of that operation or whatever you call it, and just go for the facility right now. But think about it, Jin. Do you really think all they're doing is patrolling the area with some knights? Especially when they're so protective of this place. Even when they have a way to communicate with the 12 generals in place. Then, there was a single level 6 magician along with several level 5 magicians in the city. Above all, Shin Woo was most wary of the magicians, whose ability was to change mana to enact miracles. He had no idea what they could do. Shin Woo was sure that they were involved in all this, so he couldn't move in haste and make a mistake that shows any sort of weakness. Rather, now was most important. Ah, Sir Seta, thank you for all your hard work. Sir Seta, please rest well. You guys worked hard, too. Good work. One would think that you were born as an aristocrat. Shin Woo, who'd completely explored the outskirts in only 2 days, was off duty, and after changing shifts with other knights, observed the magician's movements in a way that wouldn't arouse suspicion, whilst also searching for the hotline that he assumed allowed the Lord to communicate with the 12 generals. In order to do so, he would need to get closer to the Lord. My lord, it is I, Sir Seta. Ooh, Sir Seta, have you been comfortable here? Yes, I am quite comfortable due to your consideration. Though that consideration only really included accommodations outside where he could keep his horse, that was more than enough for Shin Woo. The location of his accommodations was also excellent. Though he could inspect the outside from the inside, the same couldn't be said of the reverse. In order to watch their movements, one would have to get within a certain distance, which was especially pleasing to Shin Woo. Then, what have you come for? If you wanted to ask about the Imperial Command, I apologize, but I can't tell you much. It's not because I can't trust you. It's quite sensitive information, so please understand. Ah, please don't apologize. I don't have the authority to ask for such information. Rather, if it's all right with you, my lord, I could take over some of the patrols in the inner city that have been ignored as a result of the knights following the Imperial Command. Announcing his intention to break away from the main task at hand, upholding the Imperial Command, meant that, in other words, Shin Woo really wanted to help, but he wasn't really interested in detailed information. You truly are. The Lord was slightly moved by his words. This man was genuinely trying to help him. He was acting loyally to the Emperor, without any suspicions or putting up any fronts. To think that there was still a knight like this in the Empire. Of course, I've already explored as much as I could on the outside, so now it's time I look inside as well. Seeing the undead commander, who was completely moved by him, Shin Woo inwardly smiled a rotten smile. If Jin was with him, he would be shocked by how the meaning of words changed based on how one said them. If that's really what you want, then can you do it for me? This is also a part of upholding the Imperial Command. The more important the mission, the more one must focus on the task. My lord, you are the one who was issued the Imperial Command. Does that not mean that your safety is paramount, my lord? Indeed, Marquis Setapan must have felt reassured having you by his side. Ho ho ho. Though it was a special situation because he was upholding the Imperial Command, Shin Woo was much too easily able to gain access to the inner city. Since most of the knights were assigned to the mission area, Shin Woo could move freely through the inner city. Of course, because he didn't know who was watching and where, he kept up the facade of a truly earnest guard. He wasn't even this perfect when he was in the army and assigned to a guard post. How is it over there? Jin Taylor. There are magicians above the walls, but they're not really doing anything special. Move around and look for places that have an excessive concentration of mana, or check if they make any sort of suspicious hand gestures. Jin Taylor. Okay, I got it. If he's going to search the inner city, then Jin would be responsible for exploring the outskirts. Shin Woo asked if it was okay if Jin could move around, since he would be bored being tied down. The Lord readily nodded, stating that so long as Jin didn't cause a fuss, there was no reason that his horse couldn't move around freely. And that was really a mistake. Of course, it wasn't easy to figure out that Jin was an undead horse, let alone a hero, especially when the other heroes couldn't easily figure it out either. There are quite a few magicians, but there are a lot less of them than the knights. If I can just figure out when they all gather in one place, it shouldn't be difficult for me to wipe them out all at once. Outwardly, it looked as though Shin Woo was emitting a cool-headed vibe, but in actuality, Shin Woo's head was turning, busily studying the state of the soldiers deployed on the outskirts and the inner city. All while keeping a close eye on the movements of the magicians, especially on the level 6 magician leader. If this guy can't, then the Lord must be the one who can communicate with the 12 generals. I'm sure of it. If he could just figure out which one for sure, then, Operation. Bro, why are you there? Could move on to the next stage. Shin Woo's goblin fire blazed. The plan was going really smoothly. There aren't that many magicians over here. What? It had been 3 days since he'd patrolled the inner city, and this was the result he'd come to after comparing information with Jin. Hearing that, Jin was momentarily dumbstruck, but soon retorted. You said those guys were the ones you needed to be most wary of. That it wouldn't be so simple, that it wasn't just knights patrolling around. That's what I thought, but when I actually looked around, I found that it wasn't all that. That's what you found in your patrol too, right? That's true. There had been a time that Shin Woo had assumed that all high-level magicians would be on par with Kratia. However, that wasn't the case. Kratia was the exception. Then again, she was a hero. She wouldn't be a hero if she wasn't the exception. Moreover, it's pretty obvious that their intellect went down considerably when they turned into the undead, though I'm not sure about their magic. Normally, there weren't that many undead that could even use magic. Even if they could, most of them could only focus on 1 or 2 spells. That's because they wouldn't be able to properly cast the spells without the calculations. The spells that they could cast were ones that they'd often used while they were still alive and were deeply instinctual. Of course, the higher leveled they were, the more they regained their abilities and intellect, so more higher leveled undead could use magic. However, the effectiveness of their magic was still a few levels down. Then what about that feminine-looking undead? There's a level 6 undead in the castle. Yeah, there is one magician in this city that I have to be wary of. Though there were few that were defending the inner city, the reason that the Lord was so willing to send most of his knights to the outskirts was because he had someone he could count on in the inner city. It was none other than the level 6 magician leader. The magician leader was dreary and feminine. The fact that he could ascertain what gender she was made it clear that she was a high-rank undead, and like the Lord, looked emaciated. At first glance, she looked slender, but she possessed impressive magic. It was at a level that didn't trail behind Kratia's, whose magic he'd checked before they parted ways. But that just means I have to be wary of her during battle. That's all, I'm sure of it. Her communication abilities, surveillance abilities, and even her skill in basic magic searching is worse than mine. Even if she saw normal patterns that moved magic, or if I used magic to secretly provoke her, her response was always the same. If you provoke her, she might report it to the Lord. Including all that, don't we need to see how she responds to such a provocation? That meant that he was confident that his identity wouldn't be exposed, regardless of how she responded to the provocation. Jin felt sick of hearing Shin Woo's confident attitude. The most surprising thing was that it wasn't arrogance, that confidence always came from a thorough analysis. And as a result of my tests, she wasn't able to sense my magic until very late, and was barely even able to sense it. Next, I released magic a few times into the air. Ultimately, it seemed as though she thought she was seeing things in return to what she was doing. That trait of finally sensing magic but then not really doing anything about it really fits an undead. Right? In other words, no matter how powerful they were, their brains were damaged, and thus, they were idiots. Her magic's offensive capabilities were likely unquestionable, but this wasn't the first time he'd fought against a powerful opponent. Shin Woo was even confident enough that he could get close to and take care of her before she could even start casting her magic. The magicians aren't really following the Imperial command. The alarms in the city or the patrol routes aren't covered by magic, and their only real purpose is to act as artillery troops. Then there's nothing to be afraid of now. Let's go to the secret facility. No, not yet. There's just one more thing I have to do before we can move on. It was to find their communication line with the 12 generals. If he just found it, and either destroyed or secured it, then he would have nothing to be afraid of. And now that he'd figured out that the magicians weren't all that strong, the thing he had to look out for was the Lord. You're just doing this for fun, aren't you? I'm doing this so we can avoid danger and get a clean victory, you know? Ah, Jin, starting now, figure out how to covertly get into the city without being seen. Can't we just kill the Lord and prevent them from contacting the 12 generals? Well, you'll see. Shin Woo wasn't blowing everything out of proportion just so that he could fulfill Guillotine Steelworker's request. He wanted to use this chance of infiltrating the city to figure out how the Empire operated. He also wanted to take over the level 3 danger zone city as well. To do that, he couldn't just kill the Lord and run. But if Jin knew about this, he wouldn't really cooperate with me. He'd already experienced clearing several level 2 danger zone cities, but the level 3 danger zones and up were completely different. There were 3 level 6 elites in this city alone, and there are also some normal level 6s on top of that. There were also hundreds of level 5s. If he added in the level 4 knights as well, they couldn't take on those numbers. It would be barely doable to fight straight up if he had all of the Pauls and Golems with him. However, Shin Woo couldn't use up his valuable resources here. Those guys, I should be able to use them. He left his lodgings and returned to doing his duty whilst his brain turned hectically. How could he destroy this city whilst completing his objective? He was gradually estimating how he would go about it. Now, give your regular report? It had only been a day since he'd marked the Lord as his primary target, yet surprisingly, things were progressing much faster than he expected. While Shin Woo was on his regular patrol and wasn't even bothering to hide his presence, he began to see a peculiar magic reaction, though it seemed like the Lord hadn't expected him, a mere knight, to see him. Where? Here, this way. Shin Woo didn't miss the Lord's flow of magic from beyond the bedroom door, and clearly remembered it. It seemed as though the Lord wasn't guarded in the least and was letting the world see his magic. It's not really that difficult. To be exact, it was about the same level as the anti-skull's security. It was so easy to figure out that he actually felt uneasy. After the magic pattern was displayed, he heard a small sound coming from inside the room. At the same time, he felt an odd magic reaction. It seems as though the Lord had just taken out an item that he had been hiding. At that moment, the mana pattern that the Lord exhibited changed again. If the first was to unlock the security around the castle, then this one was to activate the magic tool that he'd taken out. This isn't very tough either. It wasn't very difficult for someone who possessed general administrative rights. Of course, if the other heroes knew, including Kratia, they'd be pissed. Shin Woo's magical ability had developed significantly, to such an extent that they couldn't even begin to imagine. Greetings, Lightning General. After Shin Woo had completely memorized the magic pattern, he listened carefully to the suddenly speaking Lord. Unfortunately, he couldn't hear the other speaker, but he could at least tell that the one he was speaking to was one of the 12 generals, or more specifically, the Lightning General. There are no abnormalities. Yes, of course. Our defense remains impenetrable. A golem, or even a single fly won't be able to get through. But what kind of golem? No, it's nothing. If Shin Woo still had lips, he would be smiling bitterly right now. It was apparent that the Lord's back was bent and that he was kowtowing, even through the wall. Shin Woo could also observe their one-sided relationship. That must prove just how high a general's position was. But then, unimportant changes. But, because the Lord kept repeating the Lightning General's instructions, Shin Woo was able to hear what the Lightning General was saying. As he thought, once an undead gets around the general level, They're able to surpass the limited intellect of an undead, which was slightly worrying to him. There's nothing like that. Yes, you can trust me to carry out your orders. Fortunately, because the Lord was an idiot, the Lord didn't mention Shin Woo at all. Of course, even if he did mention him, he was still acting as though he was an undead loyal to the Empire, so it wouldn't be such a big deal. However, it was obviously much better to just pass over him than to draw attention to him. Then in a month, yes, of course, I'll contact you if those golem bastards show up. His Imperial Majesty, it's a relief that he's still healthy. The Lord was sycophantic to the very end of their conversation. Shin Woo had acquired some information. He gave a regular report to the general once every month. Moreover, their conversation had ended without any mention of him, so as long as he stole the device that allowed the Lord to communicate with the general, he would be able to clean everything up. Shin Woo had a hunch that his plan could move on to the next stage. However, he didn't act immediately. I'm going to aim for a time when I can kill the Lord without any suspicion. What's most important is the aftermath. I have to focus on that first. He patrolled through the inner city, and it wasn't only the Lord or the magicians that he was keeping his eye on. Shin Woo watched the undead who regularly visited the Lord, as well as the Lord himself, as he called them and gave them their orders. In other words, he watched how the undead within the city communicated with each other. The knights who were finished patrolling would have to report to the Lord, so the Lord wasn't left alone most of the time. There was a reason that this was a level 3 danger zone. But still, it's not like the Lord's protected 24/7. High-leveled undead accept their death and move on. They accept the fact that they have died, and build a new life and order for themselves. Obviously, these undead, who've accepted their deaths, are much scarier than those who roam around, rejecting that they've died. Despite that, there was still one habit that they couldn't leave behind: sleep. Even though they know that they can't sleep, they lay on their beds in order to retain their sanity. The higher rank the undead, the more likely they were to do so. And this Lord is the same as well. That time was now. The Lord, who had activated the lock again and hidden the crystal, slowly walked outside. Shin Woo acted as though he met him by coincidence as he passed by the area, and calmly bowed his head. My lord, good work, Sir Seta. This level of work is nothing if I can help uphold the Imperial command. Very impressive. I'll call you later separately and reward you. He responded, called over one of the knights nearby on standby, and went towards a different room. It was the room where the level 6 magician leader was staying in. It seemed as though these two were lovers before they died who always slept in the same place. There was no way to tell if these two still were sexually active, but Shin Woo prayed that they weren't. Nice. Then let's see where they're going. Shin Woo saw the two join up and head to the bedroom, and naturally entered into the room the Lord had once inhabited. He'd already perfectly memorized the patrol routes for the inner city, and knew that there wouldn't be anyone guarding the Lord's room for 7 minutes. Code 0819 Communication Line. A high-rank communication line that enables communication by using a special frequency. Nice. Now I won't encounter one of the 12 generals through this. He unlocked the extremely simple lock and had extracted the communication line that had been hidden in the room. After Shin Woo had placed it into his inventory, he comfortably escaped the room. And realizing that he had time to spare, grinned, and went towards the Lord's bedroom. While patrolling the inner city for the past few days, Shin Woo had figured out exactly where all the knights and soldiers were stationed. From first glance, their defense looked impenetrable, with no avenue of getting through, yet the corridor leading to the Lord's bedroom chamber wasn't watched. And above all, so long as one wasn't discovered as soon as they entered the Lord's chamber, no one would even try to stop them from exiting through the corridor. Thank you for all your hard work, Sir Seta. You too. Is the Lord asleep? Yes, he is. With the magician leader. Ahem. The knight sheepishly slandered the Lord. Shin Woo imagined their skin and bones coming into contact with each other, entwined in lovemaking, and felt truly disgusted. But that just meant that this was his opportunity. If you're aware of that, why are you standing here? We should just let them enjoy themselves and leave them be. Actually, I've already sent the other soldiers away. I've already confirmed that it's safe, so I was going to go. Alright, I should go rest too. Since a level 6 magician was with the Lord, more protection shouldn't be necessary. As such, with just one sentence from Shin Woo, The knight obeyed and left without any suspicion. His plan probably wouldn't progress as smoothly if the level 6 knight leader were here, but as soon as Shin Woo had entered the inner city, the knight leader completely trusted in Shin Woo and continued with upholding the imperial command. Everyone in the city trusted Shin Woo. Yeah, this moment is when it's most exciting. When he was sure that the knight had left and there was no one left that could see him, Shin Woo comfortably walked through the corridor. Soon, he gripped a lightning tooth in his hand. At the very least, they fortified the room with magic in case of intruders. Even if it's rotten, it's still a herring, huh? The Lord's bedroom was complicatedly equipped with alarm and defense magic. But that was all. To Shin Woo, who could ascertain the very base structure of magic, it was even more useless than a physical wall. Hut! Shin Woo swung his blade, emitting powerful lightning, while curving it intricately. The next moment, all the magic that had been set up vanished. If a smarter magician had set this up, then the moment that the magic was forcefully dispelled, there would be an additional measure, like a magical formula that trapped the invader. But unfortunately, the city's magician leader wasn't that talented. HMPH. But regardless of how stupid the magician was, they should at least be able to quickly recognize when their magic was released. Therefore, Shin Woo didn't hesitate and walked through the room. To an onlooker, seeing the two bear undead would cause severe psychological damage. The man and woman looked shocked and locked eyes with him. Huh, he hadn't acted very covertly, but he had been quick. The moment he entered the room and they discovered him, Shin Woo's lightning tooth shot out like lightning, and struck the magician leader's neck, cutting her off from speaking. No matter how much Shin Woo's stats had gone up, or how powerful Rule of Bone was, an elite level 6 undead wouldn't go down from just a single strike. However, what he used wasn't just a regular sword. It was artifact that contained the lightning element, an element that he'd unleashed to its full potential. You probably can't move. Yeah, it seems like you don't have lightning resistance either. I would have preferred if you did, and could still move around. Amongst all of his other elements, lightning was by far his most powerful. The lightning element was inherently quick, and was ridiculously powerful as well. Aside from that, the lightning element possessed a special ability. The electric current would paralyze the recipient for a short time. Even if he wasn't able to kill them, the fact that he was able to momentarily impair their movement meant that he had an advantage. Moreover, the electricity prevented one from speaking, so it was suited for covert operations. What are you? The Lord stood up and attempted to yell at Shin Woo's brutality, but from out of nowhere, a lightning tooth flew like lightning at the back of his nape, striking true. Of course, the Lord was likewise silenced. If the two hadn't been bare naked, with no defensive equipment on, and hadn't been engrossed in each other, things probably wouldn't have progressed so easily. As I thought, they can't stop themselves from engaging in their habits. Because they weren't able to completely give up their humanity, they die so emptily. The Lord and the magician had stiffened in place, but Shin Woo didn't become careless, and struck them with another 2 flying lightning tooths. This was because their paralysis would soon wear off. Shin Woo, who'd acquired so much time to finish the job, gripped the first lightning tooth that was still embedded in the magician's neck, and discharged all the lightning, completely blowing her head up. A truly clean and explosive strike, befitting of the name Bursting Thunder. Shin Woo's lightning had paralyzed her mana, so it was impossible for her to guard against it, even if she had attempted to use her magic to do so. Ultimately, the level 6 elite magician pitifully lost her life in an instant. You have acquired 157,550 Perium. You have acquired the LV6 Kadinan magician leader, Solarides Fingerbone. Shin Woo collected the loot with his free hand that wasn't gripping a sword, and turned his head. The Lord was bare naked like his lover, Solrid, who had been the first to go, but when Shin Woo looked over the Lord's unattractive body, and in particular, a specific part of his body, he became more and more pissed off. I'm a level 6 undead too, so why? Gawk? Of course, it was because they were bare naked that he was able to kill them so easily, but even so, why? He couldn't go any further, as saying anything more left a bitter taste in his mouth. Shin Woo gripped the sword burrowed in the Lord's neck and forcefully twisted. A powerful electric current was quietly discharged, afflicting the Lord's body with a horrific pain, but, Contrary to Li Shin Woo's desire to torment and curse at the Lord for hours on end, the Lord soon died. You have acquired 210,780 Perium. You have acquired the LV6 Undead Commander, Nelopa's lower jawbone. You have acquired the LV6 Undead Commander, Nelopa's sphenoid bone. It had been a long time since one of Bone Reinforcement's abilities, Lucky Finish, had activated, but because of it, he'd acquired 2 level 6 elite bones. This should have been a happy occasion, but he didn't feel all that happy about it right now. He'd definitely killed the Lord with his own 2 hands, yet it felt unbearable, as it felt like he'd been defeated by the Lord. Li Shin Woo had acted it up, but Li Shin Woo similarly couldn't completely give up on his humanity. Damn it, huh? However, whilst muttering in frustration, Li Shin Woo turned his attention elsewhere, looking at the table next to the bed where the Lord and the magician had placed their clothes. Plan A was progressing well, so this was something he definitely needed. The equipment will probably transform, but the clothes that have no abilities should be fine. Li Shin Woo steeled himself and grabbed the pile of clothes, but he felt something else inside of it, something that wasn't cloth. The moment Li Shin Woo tilted his head, he saw an odd light. Fortunately, the clothes hadn't changed, but an item that was hidden within them had changed. You have acquired the LV5 Heart Evolution Pendant. Through bone reinforcement, the item has transformed. You have acquired the LV6 Bone Evolution Pendant. Oh, as soon as the light subsided and a message appeared, Li Shin Woo hastily grabbed onto the level 6 pendant that had been inside the clothes. The pendant shined a clear, dark gray and was composed of bone as expected. He didn't know what it was originally made of, but he could strangely feel that it was extremely durable. I didn't expect to get something like this. Moreover, it's a level 6 artifact. As I thought, level 3 danger zones sure are different. Li Shin Woo was deeply touched and muttered. Moreover, this was the second level 6 accessory he'd gotten since the earring. It had evolved from level 5 to level 6, so he felt like he could tell what its special characteristics were. Moreover, all he had to do was wear the pendant around his neck, so he could actually equip it, unlike the earring. He checked the item's information in genuine happiness. Then, Bone Evolution Pendant, LV6. Durability. 570/570 its. Options. Health plus 30, Magic plus 30. Special passive skill. Bone Evolution. Through this skill's effect, your bones gradually and permanently become stronger. In effect, as your health increases, your body evolves. What? Putting aside that vague description of evolving his body, it would increase his health permanently, so he could understand why it was a level 6 artifact. But if that's the case, then did the earring that he'd picked up before have a similar permanent growth ability? Unfortunately, before he could check its info, it had transformed into bone, so he didn't have a way of checking its previous ability. Wait, no, there's nothing to feel bad about. This pendant is a good enough find. Moreover, this pendant's growth ability was created due to its evolution from bone reinforcement. Just because it was a high-level item didn't mean that every high-level item would have this kind of ability. Now then, there's one thing left. Do I just equip this or absorb it? Even so, the skill was too special. He was worried that he may not gain the skill if he so recklessly absorbed it. But on the other hand, even if he didn't absorb the skill, he would be able to call it from Bone Armory. Yeah, Dad always used to tell me this. Things will work out. It didn't take long for Li Shin Woo to make his decision. Honestly, he didn't have much time to even think things through right now, which helped him quickly make his decision. He immediately raised the pendant and activated Bone Reinforcement. The Bone Reinforcement skill has become LV8. The amount of information you can extract from each and every bone has increased. Absorbing the Bone Evolution Pendant. Health and Magic have increased by 30. The Bone Evolution skill is absorbed, divided between Rule of Bone and Bone Armory. Both skills' abilities have increased. The Rule of Bone skill has become LV8. Bones under the effect of Rule of Bone will gradually and permanently evolve. All stats have increased by 5. The Bone Armory skill has become LV7. You can now summon 6 pieces of equipment at a time. All equipment information recorded in the Bone Armory are gradually and permanently upgraded. Health and Magic have increased by 20. Right after he checked his messages, Li Shin Woo was sure that his gambit was a success. He hadn't acquired Bone Evolution as it was. He had fundamentally improved his two core skills, Bone Armory and Rule of Bone. He had attained a much better result than merely absorbing bone evolution. From the start, he'd always reinforced his bones through Rule of Bone. Absorbing the skill was the right choice, as Rule of Bone had attained the bone evolution skill. But that's not all. Bone Armory was affected as well. If he were honest, he was much happier about Bone Armory's evolution than Rule of Bone's. All his weapons information would be upgraded because of bone evolution. It was extremely radical to say, but as time passed, he would be able to summon level 6, maybe even level 7 equipment. I just infiltrated the level 3 danger zone to find out what was going on inside to complete the golem's quest, yet I found an unimaginable treasure here. When he thought about it, it was always like this. Obtaining his current karma, the Joker, as well as core abilities, Bone Armory and Rule of Bone, was all due to luck. Of course, he hadn't obtained all of that just because he was lucky. He'd worked diligently in multiple areas so that he could collect different pieces of karma. The moment those pieces gathered into one, that karma had simply sublimated into something greater. The growth of Rule of Bone and Bone Armory was similar. Nice. Then, he felt like he could destroy the entire city all by himself, but Shin Woo wouldn't act purely out of self-confidence. Shin Woo sighed deeply, even though nothing came out, and examined the loot he'd acquired with a calm gaze. Whether Operation, Bro, Why Are You There? Would proceed with Plan A or Plan B relied on this loot, the Lord Nelopa's lower jawbone and sphenoid bone. Meanwhile, Jin was finding a route where he could travel unseen from the outskirts of the city. Most of the undead only saw him as a skeleton horse as he roamed around, so they weren't overly concerned about him. Therefore, one could say that his task was an easy one. Sure, it's a lot easier than Shin Woo's job of infiltrating the inner city teeming with undead, but that idiot's gathering information right in the middle of enemy territory, so. Despite Shin Woo explaining his actions most of the time to Jin still didn't really understand what goes on in Shin Woo's head. It was like when his math teacher had explained mathematical formulas to him. No matter how patient and kind his teacher explained the subject to him, he wouldn't understand it at all. Damn, I feel like we've gotten closer, but it feels like we're actually growing further apart. Even though I'm working hard not to fall behind, even if I can't surpass him. Jin momentarily thought about Shin Woo and naturally recollected the time he'd met God for the second time. He didn't really know why, but he had asked God about Shin Woo, not himself. You may never speak to me again, yet that's what you're asking. You're an entertaining child as well. But sure, I'll tell you, at least, all that I know. According to God, heroes were individuals from different worlds that didn't live their full lives. Amongst those who died, those with incredible latent potential would be brought over to this world and turned into heroes. But even God herself didn't clearly know which direction the potential would lead. Especially that kid. The power I granted him wasn't that strange. I thought he'd become a true hero once he used up all his revives, but he went completely astray. Jin recollected what God had told him about Shin Woo and looked upset once more. He'd asked her about Shin Woo so that he could learn more about him and understand him a bit more, yet even God didn't really know what was up with him. He hasn't even shown his limits yet. You don't need to try so hard to stand beside him. Please send me back. I want to try out my new skill. God didn't even know the limits to Shin Woo's potential. Jin wasn't a little kid, so it wasn't like he was jealous or anything, but whenever he felt the gap between their abilities grow farther and farther apart, he occasionally felt anxious. I know that a person's personality and potential differ based on the individual. There was nothing worse than having an inferiority complex towards one's comrade. Of course, if he were comparing himself to a normal comrade, Jin wouldn't sigh like this, but this was Shin Woo he was talking about here. Rather, he should feel reassured by his teammate, but, Shin Woo, Jin, are you about ready? But in the midst of his restlessness, a private message from Shin Woo appeared. Startled, Jin replied, I'm about done. I can fight at any time. Shin Woo, we're going with Plan A, like we've discussed. Apparently, almost all of our reinforcements have arrived, so get out without being seen and join up with the rest of them. So what's Plan A anyway? Shin Woo, I already told you. Of course, he did indeed listen to his explanation on Plan A. The next step of the plan was similar to what Shin Woo had told him to do. First, he would join with their reinforcements and then enter into the city without being seen with the aforementioned route. From here, Jin's role was incredibly important. With his incredible mobility, he would lead all of the monsters, the undead, level 4 skeleton knights and up, outside. In other words, he had to gather the mob. I know that far, but it's hard enough to find them one-on-one. What do you plan to do by dragging them out all at once? Shin Woo. I already told you about that too. I'm going to instigate the mobs and take them down. Instigate? It was indeed an impressive skill, but was it possible to control all of the undead within the city? Jin felt like Shin Woo was being overconfident and felt uneasy, but he knew that Shin Woo wasn't the type to change his mind once it was made up. Shin Woo. See you later. Alright, Jin finished the conversation by replying in an unsatisfied tone. As if waiting for that very moment, someone else messaged him, and that person was none other than Kracia Meloy. I'm here. Can we really get in undetected? The moment Shin Woo had entered the city, he messaged his reinforcements, aka Kracia. Jin was aware that Shin Woo and Kracia often talked with each other, but he hadn't expected him to call her when he realized that he needed help. Kracia Meloy, are you listening? I'm listening. I'll come out to meet you. It wasn't really a secret, Jin didn't really like Kracia very much. She was talented enough to have a discussion with Shin Woo as equals, since she was human, unlike him. And she was so eye-catchingly beautiful. Whenever he saw her, he felt like he was seething inside. Even though she didn't really feel anything for Jin, he couldn't speak to her kindly. Especially when he saw her talking to Shin Woo. Why do you come running just cause? Shin Woo asks. Kracia Meloy, because it's a fair trade. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Plus, we share any gathered knowledge. Excellent. I won't take very long. Just wait. Yeah, this really pissed him off. But because Jin would never in a million years tell anyone why it pissed him off, Jin just kept his mouth shut and ran along. And his form, which ran so quickly and covertly so that no one could witness it, was truly beautiful. In just seconds, Jin was able to leave the city and arrive at their designated location. Kracia was already waiting there. Hey, yeah, he'd heard about how she was doing from Shin Woo, but it had actually been a few months since they'd last met. Jin replied, equally as curt as Kracia, and observed her. She's way too pretty. You shouldn't even be able to take care of it here, so how? Kracia looked even prettier than before. Her light purple hair, which extended every which way, was the same, but even that had become more distinctive, looking more charming than before. And her contrasting sky-blue eyes looked straight at Jin. If you've become so much stronger, then Shin Woo must have gotten way stronger. Don't talk to me like I'm the odd one out. He'll beat you too. Who? Jin said petulantly, yet Kracia just laughed relaxingly at his remark. Could it be? Jin examined Kracia, but he couldn't gauge her level at all. Then let's go. We have to try our hardest not to fight anything and just drag them out, right? Yeah, get on. He really didn't like someone else riding him, especially when it was Kracia, but now wasn't the time to be swayed by such trivial feelings. Kracia looked a bit apologetic and got onto his back. There are undead everywhere. They looked really organized. Are you doubting me? Just stay there and watch. Jin replied coldly and soon began to run. Unlike Shin Woo, Kracia wasn't able to adapt to his speed and cried out, holding onto Jin as tight as she could whilst shivering. Jin felt just a bit better. He was well aware of how childish it was. We'll be there soon. Kook, Guwek. There were definitely undead patrolling around in their immediate vicinity, but Jin had already completely figured out where they were, where they looked, and even their movements. He was in the same area, yet they didn't notice him at all. It was possible by combining Jin's unimaginable reflexes and the route that Shin Woo had mapped out. We have 11 seconds. We have to get in within that time. Gweek, oh okay. From the outside, it looked like a normal, empty space within a forest, but Kracia, who'd been updated on the situation by Shin Woo, soon realized what was being hidden over there. She barely managed to overcome her motion sickness somehow, and took out an item. The limited order bone core that Shin Woo had remodeled. Confirming general administrative authority, opening facility. An enormous door suddenly appeared on the ground of the vacant lot, and screeched open such that one could barely make their way through the door. Kracia's expression stiffened once she sensed the awful death energy from within. Do you think we'll be able to get out safely? I guarantee you that we'll get out safely, so long as none of our opponents use magic. Likewise, Jin spoke stiffly. But the real problem's what happens after we drag all these guys out. Ah, you're right. Let's go in before the undead catch on. There are enemies everywhere, yet they were adding more enemies to their list. If the other heroes were to hear about this, no, there's really no reason to compare themselves to other heroes for every single matter. The situation made Jin wonder whether Shin Woo was really a hero or not. It's closed. Can you open it again? Yeah, that's not a problem. As soon as the two heroes entered the facility, the door closed automatically. Though they were thrown into the dark all of a sudden, Jin's blazing blue goblin fire dimly lit up their surroundings. Do you see anything? Kraisha was a typical magician. While Kraisha's other stats were fairly high, as she was at a high level, her magic stat was almost 10 times that of her other stats. It was impossible for her to assess her surroundings with her agility. Keep your defensive magic up. Got it. But Jin, who possessed a ridiculously high agility stat, immediately realized that this place was an abode of demons once he'd entered the facility. He'd heard an explanation from Guillotine Steelworker, but he hadn't imagined that it would be such a mess. Huh? I can sense a golem's magic. Weren't they failed test subjects that were buried? Then why are there golems here? At the time, they might have just been failed test subjects, but... Kraisha asked whilst activating her defensive magic, and Jin replied stiffly. He had already been thinking about how he'd have to move so that he could protect himself from them. I sense someone. Then, one of them noticed them trespassing. At that moment, the pitch-black facility lit up all at once, illuminating the entire area. A human? It's a human. An administrator? The Emperor? The testing facility was definitely a lot bigger than they'd expected it to be, and it looked like it had been buried, as it overflowed with sand, as well as messily abandoned unknown cables, machines, golems' bodies, and piles of metals. As well as, are the tests over? These crazy. All of them were fused together, as if their bodies were glued together, forming a singular monster. One was a human body inserted into the center of a torso, embedded with a core rather than a heart, and in another monster's body, there was a human body bizarrely affixed to it. LV5 Golem Chimera, 1. LV5 Flesh Golem. LV6 Chimera Golem. One thing they were sure about was that none of them looked like proper golems. No, none of them even looked like proper undead. If not, then did we fail? Failure? Are they alive? They're alive. These golems that they'd found oddly stumbled here and there whilst speaking hoarsely and gradually approaching. Kraisha tightened her fists at the horrific sight, and Jin sighed deeply. Hold on tight, Jiok. And just like Shin Woo had told them, he began running. In order to awaken this facility's nightmare that lay dormant for dozens of years. Mr. Shin Woo has entered. Lloyd HK. It's been a while. I'm glad you're safe. Arian Ruparte. I'm glad you're safe. Mentes Oren. Oh, you've come. When he couldn't move, the chatting channel was the best. He had to stay in position right now, so Shin Woo entered the chatting channel, though it had been a long time since he'd last entered the channel. Like always, there were several of his seniors that happily greeted him upon entrance. Shin Woo very naturally began to act and replied. Shin Woo. I'm glad you're all safe as well, seniors. Mentes Oren. What are you doing right now? Shin Woo. I'm waiting for the right time. That's right, the right time. Shin Woo was waiting for the right time to attack. Life was all about timing, and it was even more important against the undead. And right now, Shin Woo was beginning to realize how to adjust that timing. Mentes Oren. The right time. Lloyd HK. Is it an ambush? That must mean you've figured out where the undead troops are going. Shin Woo. Something like that. I have to ambush the undead troops, as the size of their force is a bit too much for me. To be exact, it wasn't a group of undead, but an entire city's worth. It felt like he was attacking both the inner city and the outskirts simultaneously, not through physical means, but mental. They wouldn't understand, even if he explained it to them, so he just concocted a story for them. Silen Viesa. I've been hiding and picking off the undead one or two at a time, but you're amazing, senior. Mentes Oren. Those one or two undead are at the same level as you. Plus, they're elites. Man, it's been tough holding out over here, but I feel a lot better with such talented juniors appearing. Lloyd HK. Now that you mention talented juniors, I met that girl before. That newbie that entered the chatting channel briefly, but then left. Don't be shocked, but she's not weaker than me. Arian Ruparte. That strong girl, who happens to be unnecessarily beautiful as well. You're talking about her, right? Mentes Oren. Why are you getting upset again, young lady? Shin Woo had already heard about it from Krasia, that she'd managed to come across other senior heroes. She thought that they might be trouble, but because Shin Woo had given her information on them beforehand, it seemed like nothing bad happened. Prince Altania. You don't think she was level 7, do you? Lloyd HK. I'm not sure, but I'm sure that she's either at my level or stronger. Ah, and she's a magician too. Prince Altania. A magician. Who? Then we'll just have to see who's better sometime. Show her who's boss, am I right? Lloyd HK. Heroes shouldn't fight amongst each other, you dumbass. Lloyd spoke, and it seemed like the conversation was briefly paused, but then, a calm voice continued, as if it were a commander deciding whether or not he should press the nuclear missile button. Lloyd HK. Perhaps we'll be able to take on the 12 generals soon. Prince Altania. Lloyd HK. They're seniors, told us before. There are level 7s amongst the 12 generals. If that's the case, we should be able to take down 1 or 2 of them if we work together. Mentes Oren. Don't be hasty, Lloyd. Lloyd HK. Senior. Mentes Oren. I've seen 4 level 7 heroes die all at once because they were just as hasty as you. So become stronger while it's still safe. Don't be too hasty, nor too lax, since we're still going to die here. Lloyd HK. Prince Altania. The mood in the chatting channel suddenly turned for the worst. They had finally gotten over Shino Rendu's death, but it seemed like they were still deeply affected by it. Shin Woo softly sighed. Who would think of them as heroes, acting like this? But then, he received a message. Krasia had arrived. Krasia Meloy. We're in the middle of gathering them all and leaving. Shin Woo, save me. Nice work. You gathered them a lot faster than I expected. Then I'll get going now too. Krasia Meloy. Wait, no. Help me first. Krasia sounded like she was dying, but it probably wasn't from a severe injury. It probably wasn't easy for her to ride atop Jin when she had neither the horseback riding skill nor the assimilation skill. He pictured the small, almost doll-like and beautiful Krasia, dizzy and banging her head atop Jin's back, and grinned. Then, he stood up, wore some clothes over his wrinkled and dirty flesh, and finally, looked over at the broken mirror. Nice. It's perfect. The mirror reflected the appearance of Kadinan's lord, Count Nelopa. The disguise skill was also capable of changing one's voice. Shin Woo smiled after confirming that his voice had indeed changed to the lord's dreary and dismal one. As if reflecting his mood, the reflected emaciated flesh twisted around. How could I feel like I'm worse than this undead? He couldn't hide his misery or his distress, but it didn't matter. The Lord was dead. He couldn't stand again. In any way. Nice, it's a lot better than I thought it would be. It's almost perfect. He had somehow managed to raise his disguise skill to level 4 in the past few months, and contrary to when the skill was level 1 and he had to be familiar with the target to barely imitate them, he could now imitate an undead with a similar form with just the information from one bone. This was also due to his bone reinforcement developing as well. However, he had been uneasy as he didn't know how disguise would work with the undead commander. After all, he was a completely different species. But he hadn't expected him to drop 2 bones simultaneously. At that moment, Shin Woo was sure of it. The fact that he'd be able to progress with Plan A. That's right, Shin Woo's Plan A of operation. Bro, why are you there? As Kadinan's lord, I command you. All forces, assemble, to battle. My lord. The lord came personally. What's going on? Plan A was unbelievable. Kill the undead commander, act as him, and commandeer Kadinan's forces. The lord has given the command. To battle. But, wait, do you plan on defying the lord's command? No, of course not. The knights were considerably flustered once they saw the lord yell out his command right after exiting his bedroom. Even so, they couldn't defy the lord's command and immediately relayed his command to all of their forces. The once stagnant satellite city became excited in the blink of an eye. What about the soldiers charged with a mission? Recall them all. It's the Lord's command. Magicians, equip your magical devices and get ready to depart immediately. But, the leader isn't. Wait, now that I think about it, the leader isn't here. Only after creating a huge fuss did the undead realize that the magician leader was absent. Both the magician leader and the knight leader were missing, and the undead didn't know what to do. They shifted responsibility, as if playing hot potato, but ultimately, one of the level 5 elder knights who had heard his command approached him. My apologies, but wasn't the magician leader with you, my lord? This was the question he had been waiting for. He couldn't tell them himself, but he could wait for someone to ask. Shin Woo took a deep breath without anyone knowing and simultaneously activated acting and instigate, and opened his mouth. The place we were protecting. There was an intruder at the sanctuary. The magician leader was the first to notice and attempted to defeat them, but was defeated instead. As expected of the magician leader, the sanctuary was slang for the area they protected under the imperial command. Of course, they were dumbasses that couldn't tell that his lie about the magician leader was bullshit, but it seems like the words, magician leader, were quite effective on the undead, as they didn't find his lie suspicious at all. But because it was a lord's castle filled with level 5 undead or higher, not everyone let it go and questioned him. If that's the case, then wouldn't it be prudent to contact one of the 12 generals first, my lord? That was my first course of action. I contacted the general and reported what had happened. But even so, do we just stand still and do nothing? When we couldn't prevent the intruders from entering the sanctuary. That's not my intent. I cannot wait until the lightning general arrives. It's not only to prove my loyalty to the emperor. I must punish these intruders myself. This is. Shin Woo replied. He briefly evened out his breathing and looked as though he were pushing down his anger. The elder knight saw this intense anger and gulped, even though he didn't have any saliva to swallow down, and stepped back. Shin Woo was satisfied with that. Good. It seems like faking my facial expressions is perfect as well. He'd never been in a relationship before, so he obviously didn't know what it felt like to lose a lover. However, he remembered how sad he was when his scary friend in elementary school stole one of his grilled beef patties from his precious lunchbox that his mother had bought for him, so when he recollected those feelings, they completely bought his lie. We will uphold both the imperial command and at the same time, beef patties. I mean, it is also vengeance for the magician leader, Solrit. Understood? Kuuk, the lord. Shin Woo's simmering anger and regret lead to one thing. Vengeance. His feelings were clearly conveyed to the rest of the undead, causing them to feel both grief and pity. And sure enough, at that very moment, his skill leveled up. The instigate skill has become LV4. You amplify the emotions of your listeners and can cover for any contradictions or scanty evidence. Whenever his skill leveled up, the skill explanation would always be nothing more than, is this really okay like this? But Shin Woo kept a positive mindset, thinking that it's a great skill and decided to completely ignore the message. He needed to concentrate on all the undead focusing entirely on him right now. And he needed to focus on his partner, as well as his temporary partner, who were being chased from afar. Everyone, line up, we go to uphold the imperial command. Remember that, and focus. As you command, my lord. Shin Woo saw more than 10,000 troops lining up outside of the outer walls, and yelled without even twitching an eyebrow. The knights, charged with missions and that were in other areas, led soldiers and assembled as well. Their numbers began to swell once more. I trust that you know what the situation is. Shin Woo used instigate with each and every one of his words, his voice resonating and relaying his orders to the troops. This was to ensure that none of them became suspicious of him while simultaneously being a show of strength that would inspire them. The ones who dared to invade the sanctuary are there. Our mission is extremely simple. Executing all those who oppose His Majesty. Do you understand? I understand, as you command, my lord. Thousands of undead shouted all together, responding to his call. Hearing that, he calmly nodded his head, and if anyone were to see this, they would see him as an unimaginable big shot. Jin, when the two groups start fighting, take Kratia and run. I may be controlling them with my skill, but I don't know how they'll react to seeing someone alive. Jin Taylor. I got it, but how exactly are you going to do that? Shin Woo didn't reply. Instead, he ordered his entire troops to advance. To battle. Don't die in vain. You may not die until you uphold the imperial command. Yu. Around that time, most of the knights and soldiers that had been guarding the sanctuary, there were several undead that had already been killed from Jin and company, had come under his leadership, so he had around 20,000 soldiers under his command. It was truly a reassuring sight. All forces, halt. I see our enemy, but our enemies are coming. That moment came faster than Shin Woo had expected. After leading his troops and advancing for only a few hours, he saw a horse kicking up a dust cloud on one side, as well as formidable monsters that were chasing after him fiercely. Wow, that's crazy. What the hell are golem chimeras? He didn't know if the group that chased after Jin and Kratia would be at least level 5 or not, but when he checked the levels of the thousands of monsters, he smirked. But once his subordinates, the other undead, saw a mob of powerful enemies appear, they felt uneasy and took up their battle positions. Jin Taylor. Hey, I can see the undead troops. But where are you? He'd gathered mobs and even ran whilst allowing Kratia to ride on his back. Ultimately, Jin saw the undead force and was shocked at the force that numbered in the tens of thousands. He opened a private chat and messaged Shin Woo. Shin Woo calmly replied in the private chat. I'm right over here, he said and calmly waved his hand. At first, Jin couldn't see where Shin Woo was, as he was protected by the level 6 knight leader, as well as a number of high-leveled undead. However, he soon realized what Shin Woo was doing and gaped. Jin Taylor. He was at the center of the undead force. He was protected by them, instead of being the recipient of their attacks. No, from first glance, it just looked like Shin Woo had just become the undead commander. Jin Taylor. Why are you there? Once he heard that, Shin Woo was sure that Operation, Bro, why are you there? Had succeeded perfectly. It's them. Shin Woo yelled, as if he'd found the bully who had taken his short rib patties. Those wicked beasts are our enemies. The Lord has given the order. Annihilate them. Follow the Lord's command. Once the knight leader repeated Shin Woo's command, the surrounding undead responded by raising their weapons and advancing. It was as if their spirits could even topple a mountain. However, a few of them hadn't been caught up in the mood, and timidly asked. I feel a living being's energy in front of them. Is that really important right now? Kuyak. Shin Woo yelled. To an undead, being hostile to the living was paramount over all else. No, he supposed that their deeply ingrained instincts were just as important, so they wouldn't just meekly nod their heads and obey his order when a living being is present. Therefore, he needed to request that they overcome their base instincts. We're upholding the imperial command. We can take care of them later. I understand. Because of how intimidating Shin Woo was, the thunderstruck undead halted any hostilities towards Kratia and Jin, and focused their attention onto the golem chimeras. Shin Woo sent a message, telling them to take this opportunity and get out, and Jin, though dumbfounded, instinctively moved his body out of range of the undead. Though they were well within the range of the undead magicians were now focused entirely on the golem chimeras and thus, let Jin and Kratia go unscathed. Undead? Enemy? Kuhik, kill them. You're trying to kill us again? I'm sick of the Empire and the Emperor. Kill them all. Around that time, the Chimera troops, which had been chasing after Jin and Kratia like madmen, turned their attention towards the undead troops led by Shin Woo. Though the golem chimeras, who had been asleep within the facility and recently awakened by magic stimuli, deeply resented Kratia, who possessed a healthy, living, and intact body while they themselves did not, their resentment towards the knights and soldiers that charged in the name of the Empire was considerable as well. Jin and Kratia sure did well gathering those guys. Whether it was a chimera with a normal golem's body, but with human limbs attached, or one with 2 cores inserted into a human body's twisted flesh, all the chimeras had a similarly bizarre fighting spirit, which was truly an astonishing sight. However, the undead troops' morale was no joke either. How dare you murder the magician leader? Kill them with extreme prejudice. As you command, my lord. Stop these awful beasts from reaching the rest of the Empire. We have to take care of them ourselves until one of the 12 generals comes. Kill them. Thus, thousands of level 5 flesh golems, and the undead force, 6 times the size of the chimeras and averaging at level 4, crashed into each other. Who Nice. Shall I try acting like the undead commander? In this world, numbers alone cannot overcome a qualitative difference in strength. Thus, it was quite obvious that Kadinen's forces should lose. However, Shin Woo's level 7 intermediate command, as well as his instigate skill, could make up the difference. Now was the time for him to test just how much better his command skill had gotten after absorbing the undead commander's bone and leveling up. They're just worms rebelling against the Empire. Are you going to lose without even fighting back? Kuok, Kuok, we are Knights of the Empire. The swords of the Empire. The swords of the Empire. We are the swords that cleave evil. 1. The synergistic effect between instigate, which steered people's emotions a certain way and amplified them, and command, which boosted the morale and combat abilities of his troops, was ridiculously high. But the effects were so pronounced that even Shin Woo himself was thunderstruck. Almost as if on cue, organized messages courteously appeared before him. Instigate amplifies the effect of the command skill. All friendly forces' morale has almost been raised to its limit. All offensive and defensive capabilities of your forces increase by 20%. A part of your subordinates can now use bone to bone, staking their lives to inflict a critical injury upon their enemies no matter what. His voice reached all of his troops due to his instigate skill, and a faint red energy covered their bodies. Moreover, a portion of his troops, picked at random, would gain a skill that would even enable level 4 skeleton knights to inflict a critical injury onto level 5 enemies. A skill? Does this effect manifest when my command skill levels up even more? If not, then is it because of the instigate skill? And more importantly, bone for bone's kind of. It wasn't flesh for bone, but bone for bone, too. Shin Woo didn't really feel like that change was necessary, but he soon realized that it would be incredibly disrespectful to the skill if he kept thinking like that. He heard the sound of bones cracking across the battlefield, as well as powerful strikes that caused the chimeras to clearly falter and retreat. Proud knights of Kadinen, give up your lives for the Lord. If I can help the Lord, even with this rotten body, then I will do so for so long as he asks it of me. Should this body die again and again 100 times over? 3. Shin Woo was deeply moved as he saw the weak knights resolve themselves and sacrifice themselves to inflict damage upon the chimeras. What a prophet! Knights of Kadinen, show them your loyalty towards the Empire. Magicians of Kadinen, we'll burn all those wretched worms and show our loyalty to the Lord. We, Kadinen, are one. Shin Woo enthusiastically raised his voice, inciting the troops further, and the undead responded in kind. They raised their swords and wands, and shouted along with him. An outside observer might think that Shin Woo had been their lord for 30 years. Is that really Shin Woo? Yep. Why is Shin Woo there? I don't know, but I'm kind of curious as to who the bro would be in Plan B. Meanwhile, Jin and Kraisha had successfully completed their mission and had escaped from the battlefield. They watched as the undead troops led by Shin Woo, and the chimeras that they'd gathered from the facility fiercely fought against the other, and cordially voiced their opinions vacantly. Upon reuniting, they both instinctively watched the other. Obviously, there was no ill will there, and even argued with each other, but upon watching the spectacle laid out for them by Shin Woo, they had no other choice but to put aside their differences. You might be right. I can't keep up with that. The genre's completely different. What did I tell you? They watched the battle between the two forces whilst resting and relaxing the overwhelming tension from gathering the mob from the past few hours. The difference in strength due to the level disparity was clear, but Shin Woo's command and instigate skills were still being used. Actually, Shin Woo's troops were starting to win, bit by bit. Perhaps his skill in commanding was even better than the undead commander, Count Nelopa, who possessed the commander karma. What exactly have you guys been doing? You saw a bit of it before when you were with us, didn't you? Then again, this was Shin Woo, who had split apart an army and caused them to self-destruct. If she thought back to that, it wasn't really that surprising that Shin Woo had commandeered an entire army to fight against another army. It seems like he's gotten a lot stronger too. Actually, his increase in strength is a lot more pronounced than these other abilities. He's been fusing skills. It must be tough traveling alongside a monster like that. Don't call my partner a monster. Oh, she'd thought that they'd completely reconciled by now, but it seemed like they were still at odds. Kraisha pondered whether or not she should say anything at this point, and her lips parted, but she ultimately decided to change topics. Not to mention that there was something that was bothering her. Are you sure you've stopped one of the 12 generals from coming? Seems that way. The seniors I met before told me go unnoticed in the level 3 danger zones. That I shouldn't make a fuss, and if I did, a big shot would show up. I feel like it's been several hours since Shin Woo started making a fuss. I see. From the very beginning, the reason Shin Woo infiltrated the city and acted was to avoid an encounter with one of the 12 generals. He had used all the means available to him to tie up all the loose ends and move as quickly as possible. So long as the general didn't have rockets on his feet, he wouldn't be able to catch Shin Woo. Shin Woo was daring, but he wasn't an idiot. He'd made this plan after carefully assessing his own abilities. That's what's scariest, it wasn't made out of pride. I'm a bit scared too. Fortunately, things got a little better between Jin and Kraisha again. They watched the undead free for all, as if they were enjoying some sort of war movie. Eventually, Kraisha finished recovering her magic and stepped forward, as if she intended on helping. It seems like they're evenly matched, so it should be fine if I were to cut down both sides, right? But you can't let them aggro onto you. I know at least that much. Kraisha replied leisurely, and covertly raised her magic. Jin's goblin fire blazed immensely as he observed her. Jin hadn't noticed before, as they had only intended on provoking the chimeras in the testing facility, but now that he had a chance to watch her draw upon all of her magic, he realized that the quantity was absurd. You, Hoovute. Kraisha simply offered a subdued smile to the shocked Jin and displayed her magic. First, she would look for a wide area, and once cast, the large-scale debuff would freeze the mana of all those within that area, as well as disrupt their teamwork. Before she could cast the spell, she had to completely understand all of the magic in the area, so it was an incredibly difficult task. While it was difficult to use, its effects were covert and immediate, so there was no better spell to use in this situation. However, she couldn't continue with the spell. Kraisha's face momentarily paled. Though her face was normally quite pale, her complexion was pale enough to now resemble an ice statue. Did you fail? No, that's not it. Kraisha firmly denied, and demanded a clear answer from Jin. You said one of the 12 generals wasn't coming. They're not. Shin Woo guaranteed that they weren't. Then what the hell is that? I have no idea what you're talking about, Jin replied in frustration, but finally saw what she was talking about with his high agility. The moment he saw it, he looked into its identity and was dumbstruck. Then, he messaged Shin Woo. Jin Taylor. Shin Woo, is that part of your plan? Advance more aggressively, What do you mean if it's part of my plan? It's perfect, Jin Taylor. No, it's become imperfect just now. Shin Woo had noticed its approach later than Kraisha or Jin, not because his abilities were worse than theirs, but because his command over the undead was just that important. In any case, it was fortunate that he was able to figure out what they was talking about after listening to Jin's warning. The hell? There was something pushing through the dense, rotten trees beyond the mountain range at an incredible speed. It was violently emitting a ridiculous amount of mana, and his eardrums, which he didn't even have, threatened to burst from its scream. The familiar face that was violently running towards them was. Bro, Shin Woo couldn't help but acknowledge that his plan, Operation, Bro, why are you there? Had been completely derailed. LV7 Treasure Eater. Steve, why are you there? You have encountered a higher leveled foe. The rebellion skill increases all skills by 14%. Half of the effects are shared with your subordinates. Shin Woo hadn't really thought about it very much, but Bone Armory pretty much stored all of his equipment in his body. All the recorded equipment didn't disappear, but instead became one with Shin Woo. The equipment was also maintained by his body, and what's worse, developed in his body. He'd absorbed countless pieces of equipment and stored them in his body, and fused different attributes together in order to create even greater equipment. Thus, Shin Woo's body was like a treasure house. The moment any treasure hunter sensed his presence, it was obvious that they'd turn their attention to him. Plus, Kraisha's rare, growing artifact was enough to draw the treasure eater's attention as well. It made sense that a treasure eater would appear when both of these treasures were in the same place. But why did he have to come now? Shin Woo was sure this issue came about due to his terrible operation name, and grit his teeth. But while he stared vacantly at the treasure eater continued to advance, sending parts of the undead force flying. Thus, he didn't have any more time to spare. What is that? The Lord, protect the Lord, quack, these monsters won't let us go. The undead realized that Shin Woo was the treasure eater's target and even in their confusion, attempted to stop it from getting to him. But because they were definitely categorized as enemies by the chimeras, they continued to tactlessly attack the undead troops, ultimately resulting in further undead casualties. Kua. To make matters worse, Steve used the treasure eater's patented technique, the Shriek of the Dead. Should he say, as expected of a level 7, its shriek instantaneously affected the entire area. The enemy has used Shriek of the Dead. However, Invisible Heart has completely protected you against mental status ailments. Shin Woo momentarily did a double take and turned around. He was worried that Jin wouldn't be able to endure it, especially because he wasn't currently linked with him. Fortunately, Kraisha had used her magic to protect both her and Jin from the shriek. As expected of a high-level magician, that monster's using black magic. Don't be afraid, the Lord's watching over us. Let's stab its limbs with our spears. The undead are also good, they're fine as well. He had roughly expected this outcome. Firstly, his troops were under the effects of his command skill, which protected them from status ailments, and secondly, his instigate skill had already taken effect. Both the Shriek of the Dead and instigate were the same type of skill, but Shriek of the Dead was definitely a lower-ranked skill than instigate. Therefore, Shriek of the Dead wasn't very effective. Ku Kahak, why you bastards? The Emperor? The Emperor is. No, I won't participate in it. Don't take me there, not me. However, the chimeras, who weren't protected by either Kraisha or Shin Woo, were affected by the Shriek of the Dead. While the chimeras were physically enhanced to the very limit, they were susceptible to mental ailments and were all affected by the treasure eater's Shriek of the Dead. The deeper one's regret and resentment, the more effective Shriek of the Dead was. It was as though the golem chimeras were born to be affected by the Shriek of the Dead. No, don't nod your head, don't, you can't, the Emperor lied to us. Please don't. Were they remembering the time when they became sacrificial lambs for the experiments? The chimeras cried tears of blood as they screamed and rolled onto the floor. Thousands of level 5 monsters had become unable to fight from just one skill. Shin Woo felt a bit sad when he saw them, but because of the treasure eater, the undead army could now breathe easy. It's time. Gouge its bones. Charge. Goo. The undead troops suddenly pushed past the chimeras and charged at the treasure eater. Shin Woo shouted quickly in an attempt to stop their indiscriminate attack, but because of the sudden turn of the events, the undead weren't capable of properly accessing the situation. Ultimately, he couldn't stop half of them, and hundreds of undead rushed towards the treasure eater. Shin Woo clicked his tongue and had no other choice but to watch the ensuing battle. Now that it's come to this, I suppose I have to sacrifice them to find out my opponent's abilities. He clearly remembered when he'd first fought against the treasure eater, his desperate battle against the level 3 treasure eater, and even when he'd fought against the level 5 treasure eater. Shin Woo would get screwed whenever he encountered a treasure eater, as it would always possess a unique ability. Plus, this treasure eater was level 7, so he wouldn't be surprised if it could teleport and take a bite out of his heart. Goo. And just as Shin Woo expected, the treasure eater had a special ability. Fortunately, it wasn't teleportation, but when it screamed, hair fell off of its body. Then, blue light seemed to spew from its body, which ended up being lightning. Kuok, my lord. The treasure eater twisted its body, discharging lightning everywhere. The undead that came into direct contact with the lightning screamed, but they were better off than the rest. The weaker level 4 and level 5 undead couldn't even scream before they vanished. Shin Woo gritted his teeth at the power that the level 7 elite displayed. He was frustrated at how it seemed no weaker despite using such an attack. I barely got control over this army, yet they become a barbecued bone platter in the blink of an eye. It didn't matter whether it was against a level 1 skeleton or a level 5 skeleton. There wasn't much difference between how long it would take for it to grill them anyway. Therefore, it would be stupid to just stand still and do nothing. Shin Woo, who'd inwardly made his decision, used his instigate skill to its very limit and yelled. All troops, retreat. We'll fight him in the city. But my lord, all forces, protect Kadinan. I understand. None could refute Shin Woo's stern command, and all of the undead there turned around. Their movements were so organized and systematic that Li Shin Woo's movement, or lack thereof, was quite noticeable. My lord, his target's me, Li Shin Woo said bravely. I'll keep him busy, so you return to the city and evacuate all of the civilians from the city. Once I'm sure that everyone has been evacuated, I'll bring him over. It's too dangerous, my lord. I cannot allow it. You dare doubt me? Li Shin Woo's booming voice even startled the most powerful undead in Kadinan, the Knight Leader, Seloin. Of course, Li Shin Woo was the lord he served and was a level 6 undead commander, but the Knight Leader had thought that his abilities surpassed the lord's. However, once the Knight Leader heard the strength in Li Shin Woo's voice, he realized that that might not necessarily be the case. Go now. Even now, our precious soldiers are being sacrificed. You fool, I don't plan on dying in vain. Kadinan and I are one. I will not fall, so long as Kadinan stays standing. My lord. Kuuk, as expected of the lord we serve. The Knight Leader, as well as the surrounding knights, were touched by Li Shin Woo's brave declaration and were on the verge of tears. He'd managed to fool them completely. Though Li Shin Woo was planning on destroying Kadinan in its entirety so that he could safely annihilate the Treasure Eater. Go tell them, arm yourselves and be ready to die for Kadinan. All the citizens will follow your command. My lord, at least let me stay by your side. You fool, only you can command in my absence. Don't say anything so foolish and go. Kuuk, I understand, I will carry out your command perfectly, I swear it. Even as he cursed at him, Li Shin Woo reminded the Knight Leader that he was the next in command and that he had to be responsible for the troops in the Lord's absence. His words spurred him to act, causing the Knight Leader's eyes to blaze with a bit of goblin fire and turn around. Even the undead that had been indiscriminately attacking the Treasure Eater began to assemble to the best of their ability. At least 20% of the troops had been burnt to crisp already, but it was comforting that most of their casualties were level 4s. Gua, of course, from the very beginning, the Treasure Eater's target had been Li Shin Woo and Li Shin Woo alone. Therefore, when the obstructing skeletons got out of its way on their own accord, it seemed thankful and beelined towards Li Shin Woo. Some of the knights couldn't help themselves and turned around, drawing their swords, but Li Shin Woo restrained them once more. I won't say it again. Go, Li Shin Woo said, and once he raised his sword in one hand, they resigned themselves and turned around. It seemed like it hadn't occurred to them that they had never seen that sword before. Now let's see how good a lightning element monster is. Once he confirmed that the undead troops had fully retreated, Li Shin Woo moved his body quickly and infused mana into the lightning tooth, as if to lure in the Treasure Eater. Li Shin Woo transformed all of his mana, which was at a frightening level, into pure lightning and infused it into the lightning tooth. The blade was covered in flickering blue sparks, and looked as though God had sent this lightning herself. Seeing that, the Treasure Eater snorted and opened its mouth. Goo! Hup! A lightning sphere popped out of its mouth. But because Li Shin Woo had already figured out that its mana was mainly concentrated in its throat, he had already expected what kind of attack was coming beforehand. Li Shin Woo threw his body out of the way, dodging the sphere, and forcefully shot out with the lightning tooth in turn. Kihawk. With Rule of Bone, it seemed like the lightning tooth actually shot out at the speed of lightning, and burrowed into the Treasure Eater's throat before it could close its mouth. Once it became level 7, it became like some sort of dragon, as it had attained thick and durable scales. Even so, its inner organs had to be much less durable than its scales. Li Shin Woo immediately exploded the lightning tooth, and funnily enough, despite it being level 7, it writhed in pain and made one full rotation on the floor. Kiha, Kook, but that was all, though it should be in a considerable amount of pain, as well as sustaining severe injuries from the lightning-covered blade and the resulting explosion. The momentarily moaning Treasure Eater immediately regained its posture and charged straight at Li Shin Woo. Come out, fortress. Li Shin Woo, startled by the Treasure Eater's unexpected speed, summoned a giant shield from Bone Armory. The reason he'd shouted so loudly was because he wanted to place it in front of him, and retreated. The giant shield, which was embedded into the ground and created by weaving giant bones together in strands, truly looked like a fortress. Bone Fortress. LV5. Durability 2, 252,250. Defense 1,200 to 1,400. Options. Effectiveness of defense plus 50%. Whether one looked at the level, the ridiculous amount of defense, or its even more ridiculous option, there was no way this couldn't be considered a treasure. He'd gotten this shield from killing one of his undead seniors, but once it had been absorbed into his bone armory, it had been remodeled. Of course, it was an item that was bestowed upon a hero by God, but the shield couldn't even withstand the treasure eater's charge for 1 second and broke apart. It had become weaker after smashing through the bone fortress, but its charge still retained an absurd amount of power. It got close and almost hit Shin Woo. The resulting force flung him several meters, and left him with no other option but to endure the pain. In pain, Shin Woo diligently restored his body and thought, "Damn, this is 100%. He hadn't expected it to recover from the shock and charge so quickly. Now he was sure. The treasure eater possessed lightning resistance. It had the full package. He had a hunch when it had unleashed its lightning, but now that it had come to this, he could say that he was sure now. It can't be helped, I have to take it down. He was thinking about how he could somehow lead it somewhere else whilst finishing up all his business here, but upon realizing that it had something he wanted, he knew he had to take it down. This probably won't be enough. Nothing good would come of him leading it to the city. Even if he did, the undead would just be sacrificed to reduce its mana. That's all, but even taking that into consideration, it wasn't enough to take down a level 7 elite. Even if he added in the chimeras, which were rolling around, as well as Kracia and Jin, who were behind him on standby, it wouldn't work. Then, Shin Woo evaded its next attack and hectically moved his body around. He steeled himself and took out a small marble-like object. This was the obvious course of action, since there was an opponent he couldn't beat with his plan. The Lightning General, the great sword of the Empire. I, Nelopa, the Empire's loyal servant, have an urgent report for you. Then he just needed to make a new plan. Chapter 25, Hansen von Dorth. Once Shin Woo had seen Nelopa's movements, he was able to understand the magic pattern immediately. He formed the connection extremely quickly and naturally. The communication line didn't show faces and only transmitted one's voice, so it was quite simple. Is that you, Nelopa? Yes, General. He was communicating with one of the 12 generals, the Lightning General. He realized that the communication line would enable him to communicate with only the Lightning General after going through Count Nelopa's memories. But that was actually quite fortunate. Count Nelopa knew quite a bit about the Lightning General, as he worked under him, and that was the primary reason Shin Woo took the risk of summoning one of the 12 generals. You already gave me your regular report. An invader? So the golems finally, did they show up? The Lightning General, Hansen von Dorth, replied, and Shin Woo spoke in an urgent tone. He wasn't lying, the situation was quite urgent, since the treasure eater was running wild, in an attempt to swallow him whole. It's not the golems, but a considerably powerful monster appeared. The Emperor's order was clear. Execute the golems, who are rebelling against the Empire. But the city will fall. If that happens, we won't be able to uphold the Imperial command, General. If the city responsible for protecting the sanctuary fell, then they would obviously be leaving the sanctuary unattended. It was such obvious reasoning, so why did he have to think it over so seriously? Shin Woo wondered whether all the 12 generals were idiots. Fools, to think you'd be put into this kind of situation from a mere monster? It can't be helped, I'll go myself. It's an honor, General. Keep as many soldiers alive as possible. If you're right, then me going is pointless if all your forces, which are meant to protect the sanctuary, are destroyed. Indeed, he'd planned on sacrificing his troops to ensure his safety, but Shin Woo didn't tell him that and cut the line. He hadn't given the general any particular information on the monster, but it seemed like the general didn't care. Well, he was one of the 12 generals. The 12 generals had nothing to fear in the Empire, aside from the Emperor. Good, a resounding success. However, if the general had been told, he wouldn't have been able to respond as calmly as he did. That his opponent, the Treasure Eater, was a high-rank level 7 elite, capable of unleashing powerful lightning, as well as possessing lightning resistance. The Lightning General, Hansen von Dorth, is level 7 and is one of the weaker generals. But because he's a swordsman who wields a powerful and quick blade clad in lightning, as well as utilizing a powerful element, he's about as powerful as a level 8 in a one-on-one fight. Thus, the Emperor uses him as an hitman, a contracted killer. Plus, he's one of the generals who's independent and works alone without commanding troops. Even Shin Woo wouldn't be privy to this detailed information had his bone reinforcement been a lower level, or had he not gained 2 bones from Nelopa rather than 1, or if Nelopa wasn't someone connected with the Lightning General. However, all the conditions had been met, so he'd acquired plenty of information on Hansen von Dorth, and had succeeded in calling him over. He wouldn't come over with bothersome high-rank undead, and his matchup against the Treasure Eater was the worst. The Lightning General won't be able to win easily. If Shin Woo succeeded in pitting them against each other, he would be able to take down both the Treasure Eater and one of the 12 generals. No, he put all this effort into calling him, he had to take him down. I'm confident I took the best course of action, but I may die a few times. To think he actually managed to call one of the 12 generals over here. He thought about how shocked Jin would be if he heard about this, and chuckled. With that in mind, the Treasure Eater shot out lightning once more. Kua, yeah, I heard you, Jin. Get over here quick. I'm dying over here, I'm on my way. Unfortunately, Shin Woo's agility wasn't high enough for him to dodge when fighting against a level 7 monster using its full strength. He attempted to stifle its approach by either using bone fortresses or spewing acid poison, but if he made even one mistake in this intense battle, he'd lose his head. Hup! Then, the Treasure Eater struck the floor with its giant tail, shooting lightning spears. At that moment, Shin Woo knew that he couldn't block the attack. He leapt into the air while the lightning spears struck his body. The Treasure Eater began shooting him with large-scale attacks and its body temporarily stiffened. The fact that only its rotten eyeballs were moving and tracking his movements was truly goosebump-inducing. Get on, okay, Geok. Right when the Treasure Eater could move again, Jin skillfully jumped, approached Shin Woo, and called for him. Shin Woo grabbed onto Jin's back and did a half-turn, safely landing on Jin's back. Immediately after, the three landed at a location quite far from Treasure Eater. You have joined up with your partner. Rebellion's effect are fully shared with your partner. Nice. This is perfect. That was really close, you know. Yuek. Jin had easily avoided the Treasure Eater's impressive lightning attack while advancing forward. He then jumped, catching Shin Woo in the air and even landed perfectly. Kraisha was reminded once more that Jin wasn't normal. Her motion sickness was the price she had to pay for underestimating him. Run slowly. Just let it out while we're running. You'll feel a bit better that way. If you vomit on my back, then I'm dropping both of you. Jin yelled in astonishment as Shin Woo patted Kraisha's back. Jin decided to ask about their current predicament. How long do you think we can keep avoiding it for without fighting it directly? Rebellion increased your stats, so probably as long as we want? You're a good guy. Shin Woo smiled bitterly at Jin's refreshing reply. It still didn't change the fact that Jin was level 5, no matter how close he was to level 6, while their opponent was an elite level 7 monster. To think he'd still be able to say something so confidently. No matter how high Jin's agility was, or how much his stats were increased through the Rebellion skill, the effectiveness of their stats shouldn't be able to match a level 7's. Now that I think about it, there's more to Jin than just his agility. Shin Woo suddenly realized. There was more to Jin than just his high agility. Jin possessed several skills that allowed him to use that agility to its very limits, or even beyond its limits. According to him, each of Jin's reflex-related skills immediately increased his speed. Moreover, Steel Heart further increased his mobility, so it made sense that he was still confident. So why did you tell the undead to back off, Shin Woo? You could have sacrificed them to weaken it a bit. I sent them back to the city, since it'd be better to fight within the city if we want to take advantage of our numbers. And in the process, he stayed behind to keep the Treasure Eater busy, further cementing their loyalty to him. If the undead could still shed tears, then his troops would have been sobbing during their retreat. And I'm going to group up with them soon. So what about those guys? You should be able to control them, right? Originally, the Golem Chimeras had been their objective, but now, no one cared about the thousands of Golem Chimeras. Kraisha didn't doubt that Shin Woo would be able to control them and use them to inflict damage upon the Treasure Eater. And if that happened, if I can consolidate all our forces into one single force, we may be able to take down a level 7 elite. Since I'm level 7 now too, You really are level 7, huh? Shin Woo thought there might be some truth to Lloyd's statement regarding Krasia in the chatting channel, but he hadn't expected her to actually have reached level 7. That meant that she was at the level of a high-rank level 6 when they first met. However, he was surprised and knew that she was talented, but it wasn't something that would change their situation very much. It's not like your plan would have changed if you knew that I was level 7 beforehand. Plan? What plan? Isn't your plan over with now? Jin, who had been busy concentrating on evading the treasure eater, stuck his nose into their conversation. Shin Woo genuinely laughed and replied, "You probably wouldn't know, but there's one part left of operation, bro. Why are you there? I prepared something in case an unexpected, powerful enemy appeared. Plan D." Plan D. Of course, he was lying his ass off, but Jin was completely fooled and replied in astonishment. Before he explained Plan D, he asked Krasia, "Krasia, something unexpected happened. You could get hurt, so you can leave if you want, I don't mind. You helped us attack the testing facility, so I can reward you too." I told you, I'm level 7. Didn't you hear me? Was he intending on taking her, a level 7, out of his plan? Her expression was no longer of disappointment. Instead, she poked Shin Woo's back with a face marred with confusion. But because his back was entirely composed of bone, her finger just ended up hurting. "I heard you. What kind of plan takes out a level 7? There's no way I'd run away unless one of the 12 generals was." As expected, she realized midway what his plan was with her impressive intellect. "You're going to bring one of the 12 generals into this? One of the 12 generals? Why would a general come here?" Jin, who had been listening, was startled and yelled. However, Shin Woo smirked and nodded his head. "Yep, I called a general. I know about him through Nelopa. Are you insane? What are you going to do?" Krasia and Jin were shocked and demanded a clear answer out of Shin Woo, who treated this like he were inviting a close friend over. Jin especially, as he pledged that they would live or die together. However, Shin Woo remained calm as ever. He was actually really nervous, but he was well aware that if he showed his unease, he would just further exasperate his teammates' own anxiousness. "Listen carefully. The Lightning General, Hansen von Dorth, is coming, and he's one of the generals who works alone." I heard that there were generals that acted independently, but he's still a general. He's on another level, even to another level 7. To become level 7, one needed to attain 6,400 total stats, and Krasia had barely made it past that to become a level 7 magician. However, that didn't mean that every level 7 was the same. Those who'd reached 6,400 stats were level 7, but one needed 12,800 stats to reach level 8. And those who were really close to that threshold, like those with 12,799 stats, were still considered level 7. A general would be closer to level 8 than 7. Seriously, just listen. He specializes in one-on-one fights, so the Emperor uses him as his personal hitman. And he's best at using lightning. Lightning. His explanation caused Krasia to furrow her brow. For a while now she'd been vacantly thinking, a level 7 elite really is different from the norm, after seeing the level 7 treasure eater continuously discharge lightning. Then, you're going to make it fight against the general, and then even a general shouldn't be able to take it down so easily when it has such a powerful lightning resistance. Of course, it'll be tough for the treasure eater to take the general down too, but if it gets into a melee fight, then the lightning general loses his advantage. Well, that's true, but Shin Woo was conjuring up some plans that would depend on the situation in case the general was much stronger than he expected. Since he held all the cards. "So what are you going to do, Krasia? You want in or not?" His final card was Invisible Heart. Even if he did his best and prepared a myriad of strategies, he wasn't confident that he could take down a big shot like a general without dying in the process. But if Krasia nodded her head, he could replace Invisible Heart with Krasia. With her, it would be a perfect hand, a royal straight flush. He was sure of that. The great level 7 magician anguished over his offer. Ultimately, she made up her mind. Shin Woo, you really think we can just leave them like that? Yeah. He sent Krasia away, and when it was about time that they returned to the castle, Jin asked Shin Woo a question. "Them?" was referring to the chimera golems that were still rolling on the floor and grunting. The fact that they were still like that Despite the fact that Shriek of the Dead should have worn off by now, must mean that they were suffering from PTSD. I feel like they'll just stay like that if we leave them here. They don't have a part in my plan for the time being. We should just leave them like that. So, you're saying that you are going to use them later? Of course. Shin Woo nodded his head, as if saying, wasn't it obvious? Why are you asking me that? They were already on a Joker's stage, they couldn't leave unless he said so. They would either dance to his tune, or die. He would only allow one of those choices to pass. The Golem Chimeras were comprised of a group of undead that were at least level 5. He was confident that he could inflict damage upon a general, so long as he used them properly. What if something goes wrong? Well, then I suppose I'll die a few times or something. Don't worry about it too much. Jin was well aware of the fact that Shin Woo's words were just hot air. They exchanged a few words before the battle, and in the process, Jin once again realized just how determined Shin Woo was, then steeled himself as well. Kawoo, Kook, how long do you think it'll take before the general shows up? To be honest, even Nelopa didn't really know how long it'd take for him to show up. But I'm sure it won't take very long, since he had plans that would let him hold out until the general showed up, no matter the situation. Shin Woo said, and looked backwards. The treasure eater was chasing after Jin and was close to catching them. Light was steadily radiating off its body, and it seemed as though it would let out a big one soon. Though I have no idea how long we can last against that guy. Why the hell did that thing appear here, when it's so hard to even find a level 7? You said that there was only one level 7 elite bone in the secret shop. Instead of asking me, why don't you ask him? Shin Woo was also speechless. This operation was supposed to be relatively risk-free and safe, and he had planned to finish things up without any problems. He'd let the chimeras and the undead destroy each other, and then loot everything in the facility. The fact that things had gotten so out of hand was all because of that asshole Steve. To think that a level 7 treasure eater actually existed, even if he had assumed one did exist, how was he to know that that level 7 treasure eater would appear right before him? According to his seniors, treasure eaters were such a rare species that meeting one was like winning the lottery on Earth. Since it's come to this, we have to get that thing to pay us back for making us walk on such a tightrope. Your voice is really scary right now. Goo. Then, Steve began attacking. However, Jin was able to avoid it easily by momentarily accelerating. The lightning cannonball barely missed, and vanished after leaving behind a crater several meters wide. If they had been directly hit by that, they would have been reduced to bone power. They would have died on the spot. Just one of these would destroy the castle walls. It's all right. Shall we use the undead as meat shields? Fortunately, it seemed as though that skill wasn't something Steve could use often, as it was apparent that Steve had gotten weaker. Its speed at which it chased them had slowed. While it was slowed, Shin Woo and Jin moved hurriedly and arrived in front of the outer castle walls. One of the soldiers atop the walls, surveying his surroundings, noticed Shin Woo and yelled happily. The Lord has returned. Oh, the Lord's returned safely. Hurry, open the front gate. But before the undead opened the front gate, Jin let out a hup, and seemed to put pressure in his legs. The soles of his feet, or rather his hooves, suddenly changed shape. Shin Woo caught a glimpse of it, and to him, they looked like spinning helical springs. Huh, did Jin just get an ability like that 1x fruit? Shin Woo was astonished, but at that very moment, Jin slammed his feet onto the ground, leaping high into the air. He'd leapt to a ridiculous height in such a short period of time that even Shin Woo was shocked. Seeing that, the undead seemed confused, and Jin calmly landed above the castle walls. It was such a soft landing, belying the powerful leap. How's that? Awesome. Hut. Jin snorted at Shin Woo's honest appreciation and was quite happy. It seemed like Jin had been considering various ways in which he could make full use of his ability. Honestly, there was a large degree of freedom in the way he could use Steel Heart, which enveloped his body in Mana Steel, and he thought that he could develop it any way he wanted. But, to change a certain part of his body into springs, it was both a simple and extremely effective idea. My lord, isn't that horse Sir Seta's? Now that you mention it, I don't see Sir Seta anywhere. Did he perhaps? Sir Seta left this horse to me. He was a knight who fought loyally for the Empire till the bitter end. Ooh, the knights took the death of this imaginary figure, Sir Seta, hard. There were several holes in his story that didn't make sense. For example, why Sir Seta had stopped appearing around the halfway point, or how he died, or how he'd bequeathed his horse to the Lord. However, those trifling matters didn't matter to them right now. That monster will fall by our hands no matter what. That's not all. We'll punish those disgusting bastards who invaded the sanctuary in His Majesty's name. Follow Sir Seta's example. Remember his will. Jin didn't do anything, but his existence managed to boost the morale of the undead. By the time he tilted his head, the pursuing treasure eater forcefully rammed into the outer castle wall and showed itself to all of them. Kua, Quack, the treasure eater, its gigantic body several meters long, had substituted its speed for its weight in order to deliver such a powerful charge. It was truly a horrific impact. It seemed as though the castle walls would crumble then and there, and within the vibrations, Shin Woo yelled out in a calm, confident tone. Charisma was everything to a lord. Who defends Kadinan? We do. Then, defend it. Show that monster that it cannot look down on us. Understood. Jin couldn't believe his eyes. The knights and soldiers atop the castle walls then took the plunge, free falling to the ground. Several of the knights had landed properly, but the soldiers let out a horrific sound upon landing, as if that alone would kill them. Yet the other soldiers followed suit and took the plunge. What the hell is that? Suicide commandos. Shin Woo replied objectively, as he started to push them. He didn't want to waste the precious knights, so he insisted on fielding the low-leveled commoners and soldiers first. With one order from the Lord of Blood and Iron, the city's undead stood before the castle walls without a speck of suspicion or fear. Guwu, for the Emperor, for the Lord, for the Kuhik. Skeletons from everywhere fell to the ground. The treasure eater charged once more, but it collided with the accumulated heaps of skeleton bones, and it had to be satisfied with just breaking through the piles of bones. It was both the result he was praying for and expecting. Honestly, sacrificing 100 level 1 or 2 skeletons to stop one of the treasure eater's attacks was well worth it for Shin Woo. This is? Show them your spirit. The spirit of a warrior who won't let that monster through. Those warriors had already turned into bone, and if one were to look for them, no one would be able to find them. Take after their courage. Show them that Kadinan will not fall today. We can't lose to a mere monster. It's time we repaid the Lord for his grace. These level 1 and 2 skeletons, which really didn't serve any other purpose than to be a momentary shield, fell to the ground in droves. However, it didn't matter. There were about 100,000 skeletons in the city that weren't part of the army. Good. With this, the inner city shouldn't fall before that guy arrives. This isn't something a human being should be doing. I'm a skeleton, remember? And those dying to the treasure eater were also either skeletons or zombies. Shin Woo grinned as the treasure eater threw a fit and rampaged at the never-ending additional reinforcements that kept falling from the castle walls. It didn't matter whether it decided to tackle them with its body or fire its lightning. Because hundreds, if not thousands, would come to reinforce them. The treasure eater was already quite tired as it's fired off several large-scale attacks while chasing Shin Woo. Kuhiake, the undead would gather and prevent it from advancing, like a rising tide. Seemingly realizing this, the treasure eater gave up on advancing rapidly and reserved its magic and stamina, as if saying, let's see who holds out until the very end. It seemed like the treasure eater had opted to break through the skeletons slowly. Show that monster that our will is even harder than these very walls. Glory to the Emperor. I will stake my life to protect you, my lord. And so, the meat shield plan began in earnest. One by one, the undead climbed up the walls and fell towards the treasure eater. The treasure eater destroyed those skeletons and accumulated bones. Wow, look at that line. Fall one by one. Remember, one by one. There was now a queue for skeletons to climb the castle walls. Like they were lining up to ride an amusement park ride. Jin watched the treasure eater that restlessly shattered the skeletons and zombies, as well as the man who sent these skeletons and zombies to their deaths one by one, and thought it looked like a trainer tossing a lion food at a zoo. You're only doing this because fighting it would be troublesome, so you're passing on the job to him, right? You know me too well. Shin Woo checked the time and effectively used the skeleton volunteers. 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. In just a few hours, Shin Woo had managed to clear the city of about 70% of the city's level 1 and 2s. When they died, they left behind a heaping mountain of bones, and as such, the treasure eater would have to put in the effort to destroy the accumulated bones. Since they were bones that contained the very essence of the undead, it seemed as though the bones were more durable than when they were still alive, which caused the treasure eater to expend even more energy. You don't need to collect those? Level 1 or 2 bones are useless to me now. However, level 3 or 4 bones are different. Jin, you got it, right? Are you telling me to go and collect them? Exactly. One fortunate aspect of this plan is that even though he was continuously throwing bodies at it, the treasure eater wasn't losing any strength. Rather, it seemed to be gradually getting stronger for some strange reason. Because he'd never fought a treasure eater for this long before, Shin Woo wasn't really aware of it, but considering its power, as well as its hostility towards Shin Woo, it seemed as though an increased obsession for treasure gradually increased the power of a treasure eater. Perhaps it might be an innate skill of the treasure eaters. You're enduring well. The general will be here soon. Yu, my lord, I'll go as well. And finally that time had come. All the city's low-level undead were gone, and now the level 3 and higher elite forces had to intervene. Shin Woo nodded his head and yelled, "Your tenacious spirits will protect our city, no, our empire. You inspire the allied undead through the instigate skill. The command skill is temporarily strengthened, and a portion of your subordinates are able to use the skill, Meat Shield. The intermediate command skill has become LV8. All stats have increased by 3. He'd hit the jackpot again. It was just like with Bone for Bone. A part of his subordinates could use a skill called Meat Shield. That would increase their defense by 3 times when sacrificing themselves to protect another. I will protect this city. My lord, please watch over me. The skeletons that had acquired the skill fell with redoubled courage. Of course, even though they have 3 times the defense, their enemy was a level 7. Instead of futilely dying in 1 second, now they would futilely die in 10. Shin Woo watched as they died, and sported an indistinct expression. But inwardly, he was telling Jin what he wanted. Collect them after they accumulate a bit. Before they break, okay, you demon? And 3 hours later, when Shin Woo assessed that they wouldn't be able to stop it from reaching the outer walls, Shin Woo abandoned the outer walls and allowed the treasure eater to destroy them as it pleased. They shut themselves in the inner city and began their second siege. Time passed by even quicker. All the level 3 soldiers had died, and all the level 4 knights had died as well. At least half of the level 5 elder knights had died, and the few level 6 elites they had realized that it was their turns soon and were extremely scared. Then, you fools, he had arrived. The lightning general, Hansen von Dorth, rode upon a well-embellished skeleton horse and was enraged upon seeing the destroyed outer walls, the ruined city, and the about halfway destroyed inner city. You fool, I told you to save your forces. Before he even saw his opponent, the lightning general harangued him. Naturally, Shin Woo had no choice but to likewise reply loudly. I attempted to save as many of our troops as possible, but because the enemy was so strong. I'm sorry, you worthless, pathetic fool. To think that His Majesty trusted you and gave you an imperial command. Shin Woo acted as meekly as possible and observed the general without giving anything away as he tried to calm the general down. This was the first time he'd been so close to a general ever since he'd met Urema Steelworker. There was still some of Count Nelopa's memories left remaining, but actually seeing him up close was completely different. LV7 Lighting General, Hansen von Dorth. LV5 Powered Bone Steed. Firstly, his steed looked both large and powerful, but it also seemed as though its abilities were far inferior to Jin's. It seemed as though Jin also came to that conclusion, as he softly snorted with a hut. Is he feeling prideful right now or something? But the lightning general riding on top of it let out a dignified air. So much so that the words, 12 generals would naturally come out. This power that could only be attained through a balance of strength, magic, and agility. If he fought against him one-on-one, Shin Woo was sure that he'd lose in 5 seconds. He's definitely stronger than Guillotine. Then again, there was no way a general would be weaker than a general's subordinate, even if they were both level 7s. Unfortunately, that was all he was able to find out about him. Shin Woo figured out that the lightning general's stats were about 3 times higher than his, and no matter how skilled he was at manipulating mana, fighting the general was impossible for him. Though the treasure eater was there, he suddenly realized how ballsy he was in calling one of the generals here. But if he couldn't take the general down, then that ballsiness would just be foolhardiness. In any case, that guy. To be honest, neither the general's power or magic was what impressed Shin Woo the most. He was most impressed by how he looked. He possessed a large build and was about 2 meters tall, but outwardly, he looked so similar to a human that one wouldn't be able to tell the difference. His skin was pale and bluish, and he couldn't feel any life from it. That was the only evidence that proved that he wasn't human. The moment he noticed that he hated him so unbearably much. This guy is. While Shin Woo was busy assessing the general himself finally saw his enemy. Its body was dozens of meters long, and possessed an odd magic. He could tell that its level of strength was unusual. Gua, of course, the treasure eater, who had continued to charge with the intention of toppling the entire city, recognized the new challenger and roared. It was a frustrated cry as if saying, "How long are you going to make things difficult for me?" Even though he'd just come for the treasure. A treasure eater? Why is one of those rare monsters here? Against a similarly leveled opponent, a treasure eater would always be a high-rank elite. Knowing this, Hansen realized that Shin Woo hadn't called him for nothing. However, he was a general, and couldn't show any fear against a mere monster. With that in mind, Hansen raised his sword. The hilt was rather long, and the blade was also quite wide, a bastard sword. The metal that made up the sword's blade was extremely blue, which reminded him of the hero's sword, thunder lasting before it was transformed into bone. Cry out, Thunderbird! The bastard sword vibrated and was covered in a blinding blue light. The sound of sparks almost seemed to make the entire area go silent. That was a general's magic. He specialized in close combat, so he had thought that perhaps his magic would be low, but a general was a general after all. He shuddered at the general's ability to concentrate all his magic into one sword and the fearsome power that came with it. The treasure eater seemed quite nervous as its body shook. How nervous could it be for it to momentarily ignore its target, Shin Woo, and turn its attention to Hansen von Dorit instead? Die, you insect! Gua! Hansen, who'd finished using his skill, lunged without delay. At that moment, the lightning gathered around his sword shot out in a straight line and struck the treasure eater. It was like a laser. The moment Hansen stretched out his sword, it was impossible to dodge the attack. Even Jin thought he wouldn't be able to dodge it, so a mere treasure eater wouldn't be able to dodge it either. The lightning erased everything in its path, and the moment it struck the treasure eater's head, Hansen assumed that it either killed the treasure eater or caused a severe injury, and wasn't worried in the slightest. However, what? The moment the attack hit, the treasure eater yelled so loudly that it seemed like it would tear the world apart. Steve soon turned his anger onto Hansen instead of Shin Woo and screamed. Hundreds of lighting spears surged from the ground and flew towards Hansen. Can this guy resist lightning? He was so flustered that he was hit by the spears directly. His horse, being only level 5, died on the spot, but now wasn't the time to be worrying about his horse. Why did it have to be? Damn it, the skill that Hansen had put his full power into. Heaven-piercing Thunderbird. He wasn't bragging, but it was a fatal move that even the level 8 generals would have a hard time recovering from. It wasn't just the overwhelming mana held within the lightning would also paralyze both the opponent's body and magic as well. This was only possible because of Hansen's lightning elemental affinity. Yet, the treasure eater had not only received the attack and recovered immediately, but it had also counterattacked as well. Moreover, its own attacks consisted of lightning, so he was sure that this treasure eater was both powerful amongst the treasure eaters and had the ability to use lightning. How could the rare lightning element be? Go, lightning general. Is he making fun of me right now? Do your best, general. Oh, it's coming from the left. Hansen, who was tense at the realization that his opponent was someone he couldn't look down on, heard Shin Woo's loud cheers. Shin Woo was yelling in genuine hope that the general would come out on top, and he couldn't get pissed right now. Lightning general, please do your best. I trust you, Sword of the Empire. The surviving undead, influenced by their lord, raised their voices and cheered the general on. He couldn't help but appreciate the fact that the treasure eater was taking him on, as he'd rather fight it than stand there and listen to them. However, their honest feelings were properly passed on to Hansen. "You incompetent and loud-mouthed brats. I'll punish you once I'm finished with this annoying thing." However, it wasn't enough to be fully focused on fighting against the Treasure Eater. Since he couldn't use his lightning against the Treasure Eater, even a general like him couldn't take it lightly. The Lightning General, Hansen von Dorth, stamped his feet on the ground and grabbed his sword with both hands. His sword was infused with an overwhelming magic once more. It was the magic of one of the 12 generals. "Even without my lightning, I'm still one of the 12 generals. Insignificant creature. I'll show you the price of your ignorance and interference." Kuok. He fought against this insignificant creature that couldn't understand what he was saying and found that getting into a proper form was impossible. He gritted his teeth and lunged at the Treasure Eater. And thus, a bloody battle with 2 high-rank elite level 7s began. "Nice. Really nice." Shin Woo spectated the battle and smiled pleasingly. Shin Woo's estimation of the Lightning General, Hansen von Dorthy's power was spot on. Of course, Hansen was still stronger than the Treasure Eater, except for in lightning, as he was one of the 12 generals. But even so, it would take a considerable amount of time before any kind of conclusion was reached. "With this, all my preparations for battle are complete." Shin Woo grinned at the Drake Horn Lance that secretly rose beneath his feet. He'd infused as much mana into the Drake Horn Lance as possible, but he hadn't stopped at one, he had 5 of them. That's right, he hadn't spent the time by just commanding the undead to their deaths. He'd summoned weapons beforehand and filled them to the brim with mana in preparation for his fight with the general. Now all that's left is the lightning tooth in my hand. Because the Lord didn't normally wear armor, he was, unfortunately, unable to equip his armor. However, he believed that to be a boon instead. One hit of those level 7 elites would have smashed his armor to bits. "My lord, what are those? I've prepared them just in case the general is in danger." "Ooh, as expected of you, my lord." Perhaps because the instigate skill had affected them for so long, his undead subordinates were unfortunately not the least bit suspicious. At first, he'd considered brainwashing them even further and accepting them as Pauls, but the fact that they had so much faith in the Empire and the general caused him to think that changing who they were fundamentally was impossible. If that's the case, I should start killing these guys. If these guys couldn't fight against the general, then they had no use to him anymore. If he just let them be, they could get in the way, so now that the conditions had changed, he needed to take care of them. Focus on the Lightning General. He is the sword that represents the Empire. He is the shield that protects us. Ooh. He used instigate, inciting them again and again until the undead stopped thinking altogether. The Drake Horn Lances, which were fully charged and radiating with a gentle light, began to move. He needed to be careful so that the general didn't get suspicious. Shin Woo was indeed talented in manipulating mana. If not, then his instigate skill must have gotten stronger, ridiculously so in fact, as the undead didn't even realize what their lord was doing. Until death was at their very doorstep. Kuyak, Kuruk. Soon, the death throes of the undead resounded throughout the city. Frighteningly, several undead didn't even notice, as they were completely enraptured by the Lightning General and Treasure Eater's fight. Then again, the sound of the 2 level 7 elites fighting was incredibly noisy as well. Guak, Wy. Shin Woo controlled the 5 Drake Horn Lances as they flew through the air freely. The Drake Horn Lances mercilessly shattered the level 5 elites' heads and crushed their bodies. It wouldn't be difficult to break their heads and melt them in a single blow if he just added a bit of acid in. Only after everything had gone to hell did the level 6 Knight Leader, Seloin, who had been vacantly watching the Lightning General and cheering for him, notice what was going on and turn his head. He felt like it had gotten quiet all of a sudden, and in no time, all of the knights at his side were gone. "These guys didn't even protect you, so why?" "My lord? Haha. As I thought, you're loyal." Shin Woo was already in front of him. 5 Drake Horn Lances were floating in the air, and despite them all aiming for the completely brainwashed Knight Leader's head, the Knight Leader didn't suspect him in the least and just tilted his head. Before his eyes, Shin Woo finally released his disguise and revealed himself. "What, so I'll send you to him now. Aren't you happy?" Needless to say, the disturbed Knight Leader's eyes shot wide open, and when he was about to say something, 5 Drake Horn Lances simultaneously struck his head and body. Even when it's rotten, it's still a herring. The level 6 close combat elite didn't die from that and was holding on, but he thrust his lightning tooth into the Knight Leader's face and the 6 weapons began to spew out high-rank acid poison simultaneously. The Knight Leader couldn't do anything and just melted away. You have acquired 174,880 perium. You have acquired the Cadenan Knight Leader, Celoin's arm bone. You have acquired the Cadenan Knight Leader, Celoin's sphenoid bone. Awesome. You're really... With this, all of the undead in Cadenan were completely taken care of. Now, it was time for him to deal with the 2 happily rampaging level 7 elites. Shin Woo released his Lord cosplay, betraying the guilt-free skeletons and massacring them. Yet the Lightning General and the Treasure Eater had no idea, as they were still fighting against each other. The Lightning General didn't have the time to look away, as his opponent was freakishly strong and tenacious. Kyahawk, TCH, what's making you so desperate? Kua, since they both knew that lightning wouldn't work on each other, they instead used their mana purely to reinforce their bodies. It seemed as though both were thinking, why did it have to be him, regardless of who was more intelligent or not? Die, Kyahawk. Hansen swung his bastard sword with enough power to topple a mountain, and the Treasure Eater matched his reinforced blade with a reinforcement of its own. It concentrated its mana into its tail to reinforce it, and then used it to block the incoming sword. The moment the sword and tail met, there was a large boom and the land quaked. The entire area sunk. Their collision caused the geography of the land to change, so much so that either side had the credentials to be called a calamity. TCH, another draw. Though it was frustrating for Hansen to admit, their strength was about equal. Hansen possessed higher strength and agility, but the Treasure Eater was a monster that possessed an unusually high amount of magic, even when compared to other like-leveled monsters. It covered its weakness in strength and agility with its magic, and as a result, they were evenly matched. If that's the case, then killing it quickly was no longer an option. He'd have to take advantage of its mistakes and cause it to accumulate injuries over time. If not, then he'd have to use large-scale techniques. He was going to continue like this for now and observe. There's no way a monster like this would appear anywhere. There's still something here that I don't know about. A Treasure Eater wouldn't appear in a place devoid of treasures. The item had to be amazing to entice a level 7 Treasure Eater. Hansen thought of taking the treasure that the Treasure Eater was hoarding, as well as the treasure that it sought. With that in mind, Hansen was relieved that he hadn't reported to the Emperor regarding this excursion. He'd thought that it was unnecessary to bother the Emperor when it wasn't regarding the Golem's capture, yet it was an opportunity for him to get something on the side. Is it the Lord? Yeah, he had to have obtained a treasure recently. He'd already figured out prior that the Treasure Eater's target was the Lord. The Lord must be happy that he can use him to take care of the Treasure Eater, but after he'd taken down this guy, he would snatch that treasure off the Lord's hands as the price for telling a general to come to him. So, smile while you still can. However, during the small moment after he dodged the Treasure Eater's charge, Hansen turned his attention to the Lord atop the castle walls and couldn't believe his eyes. To the point that he believed that his eyes had finally rotted away completely after dozens of years of being an undead. The Lord who was smiling and looking down from the castle walls was completely different from before. Especially because the skeleton, who stared back at him with black goblin fire in his eyes while riding a horse, possessed power that caused him unease, albeit for a mere moment. What's this? Is that the Lord? Plus, I don't see any of his subordinates atop the castle walls. Am I seeing things wrong? No, I remember the Lord's face and energy. I remember everything. All beings possess an inherent energy that they cannot change. That is represented by magic. Even though there were cases where the shape of mana continuously developed, changed form, and developed again, it wasn't possible to instantaneously change its fundamental nature. But that guy is Kuiak. Is it because he paid too much attention to this unbelievable situation? Hansen was hit directly by the Treasure Eater's body tackle and was thrown into the air. He wasn't the only one aiming for his opponent's weaknesses, the Treasure Eater was as well. Because Hansen was so shocked, he had momentarily forgotten about the current battle. Once he'd been struck by the Treasure Eater and was thrown into the air, he barely managed to land and return to a proper stance. Even so, Hansen couldn't take his mind off of Shin Woo. Even as he swung his bastard sword and blocked the Treasure Eater's charge, he continued to think about Shin Woo. How did he disguise himself as another? If that's truly possible, then when did he start? Was it when he called me? No, it shouldn't be that easy to release the lock on the communication device. The more he thought about it, the less he understood his current situation. No matter how he thought about it, he came to the conclusion that it was impossible. Of course, it was Shin Woo's ability that had caused the general such confusion. That's what it meant to step onto the Joker's stage. Kua, TCH. Until now, Hansen had a slight advantage against the Treasure Eater, but because of his confusion, the tides of battle had turned. The Treasure Eater rushed him, as though it was capitalizing on this opportunity. Even though he knew that he shouldn't get distracted, his head was still in the clouds. Did I fall for a trap? If so, then whose? Is it Anti-Skull? No, that's unlikely. Then the golems? Is it Arama Steelworker? Yeah, it wouldn't be impossible for them to make a golem with such a strange ability. The one thing I'm sure about is that that skeleton isn't the mastermind behind all this. From that point, Hansen had already gone astray. He couldn't believe that Shin Woo had planned this all by himself and surmised that there had to be someone behind him. But unfortunately, Shin Woo no longer made him feel afraid or tense. Rather, there's no point in thinking about this anymore by myself. Pull yourself together, Hansen. Even if it's rotten, it's still a herring. No, actually it's a general. He halted all thoughts that came about from this chaotic situation and instead raised his fighting spirit. Realizing early on that using his brain isn't his job, and focusing on what he's good at is. That was the first thing he realized in his life. It doesn't matter, whoever it is that's pulling the strings. I'll show them that a general isn't to be taken lightly. At the very least, the only level 7 he could sense here was the level 7 Treasure Eater. If that's the case, then it didn't matter what obstacle he faced, he would be able to overcome it with his strength. He, the Lightning General, was sure of it. He possessed the strength that would make that possible. No matter who it is or what they do, I'll just burn them to a crisp. Once he was finished taking care of the Treasure Eater, the skeleton atop the castle walls with chaotically burning goblin fire was next. He was surprised by the fact that he had been vexed by the Lord just a little while ago, as he was sure that the Lord wouldn't be able to match him in strength. Of course, there was something that was waiting for him after 2. But it didn't matter, they would burn from his lightning. I'll burn you and break you into pieces. Witness my true strength, the strength of the lightning shadow. 1. General, Hansen von Dorth. He fended off the Treasure Eater, and the moment it was pushed back, Hansen's body was covered in lightning. If he knew that lightning was useless against his opponent, then why? Of course, the lightning wasn't for an attack. Watch, you insignificant creature. This is how you use lightning. He forcefully discharged the lightning and slowly gathered the lightning inside his body. At the same time, his body started becoming fainter and fainter. No, it wasn't becoming faint. The lightning covering his body was rotating much too quickly and was emitting sparks. He was making it so that it was difficult to see where his body even was. In the midst of that, his body and mana surpassed their limits, and it was almost as if his body and the lightning had become one. Holy shit, that's really intense. Seeing that, Shin Woo held his breath. Shin Woo had never met anyone outside of monsters with such a strong elemental affinity, and it goes without saying that Hansen's technique interested him. From the position of someone who could use the lightning element, he couldn't miss a single moment of this. This is true lightning. Kua, lightning shadow, described a lightning so powerful that could only be seen as a shadow. It wasn't merely something like attacking quickly and covertly. The key point of this technique was to hide one's body within the powerful energy. How much longer do you intend to trouble me for? Die. It was difficult to even ascertain the true nature of the technique, and it was similarly difficult to avoid it or defend against it. Even if he possessed lightning resistance, it couldn't be easy to focus that tremendous magic and heat, that surpassed that of ordinary lightning, into a single point. Kayak. The Treasure Eater channeled its energy in an attempt to resist. However, before its defenses were ready, Hansen forcefully struck out with his bastard sword. The energy surrounding his bastard sword made it look like a several-meter-long greatsword. No, it was like the lightning of a god that descended onto the mortal world. Ki Kahik, who? Hansen had pierced a giant hole in the Treasure Eater. Seeing that outrageous sight, Shin Woo thought that he might have made the wrong decision. That attack that the Lightning General had unleashed wasn't something that could be blocked with mere lightning resistance. Then I guess I really will have to be prepared to die 1 or 2 times. Huh? Goo. Goo. But then, the treasure eater showed its own secret weapon. Hansen grinned from landing such a huge attack, but the treasure eater then spawned dozens of tentacles from its injured area that attached to Hansen. Shin Woo thought, I've seen that somewhere before, as the tentacles wriggled around, sucking Hansen's energy. Quack, kahua, both Hansen and the treasure eater screamed. The treasure eater absorbed the powerful lightning that surrounded Hansen's body and was healing its injuries. Absorbing elemental power was an offshoot of an element. It wasn't just the lightning general who had been waiting for his opportunity. You bastard, Hansen, who'd lost a tremendous amount of energy, swung his bastard sword, and severed all of the attached tentacles. There's no use crying over spilled milk. The treasure eater had almost fully healed the injury it had sustained by absorbing Hansen's mana. You dare push me this far? Kiha. Shin Woo watched both Hansen and the treasure eater as they gasped for breath. Both of them had run low on magic and health. And judged strictly, earnestly, and solemnly. This is a draw. I was wondering why you weren't saying anything. But more importantly, Jin, it's about time we started moving. If one were to ask if Shin Woo was just leisurely watching the fight, then the answer would obviously be no. He had absorbed all of the level 5 and level 6 bones from his betrayal. He'd stored all of the level 3 and 4 bones in his inventory, which totaled in the tens of thousands, and increased his stats significantly. At the same time, he had infused the Drake Horn Lances with his replenished magic and had been waiting for the right time. 2, 3, 4, 5. My armor's all set too. He had the 5 Drake Horn Lances, and because he had returned to his original form, he had unsummoned the Lighting Tooth and had instead summoned his armor set. He decided to act when he had finished infusing his armor with magic as well. They went back and forth, but the general's still stronger, right? Yep. If it keeps going on like this, the treasure eater will definitely lose. And from Shin Woo's position, that wasn't a very fun conclusion. It was time to add another variable. Alright, finally, it's time to set Operation Bro, where are you going? Into motion. Man, all that means is that we're running. As expected, he didn't get fooled anymore. Shin Woo clicked his tongue and got onto Jin's back. He'd collected all of the bones and had finished absorbing them as well, so there was no point in being here any longer. Jin jumped from the castle walls and began to run. Guick. Their destination was obviously where the golem chimeras that were experiencing PTSD and rolling on the floor came from. The sanctuary, the Empire's testing facility. That heretic, Guak. At Shin Woo's sudden departure, the Lightning Shadow General and the Treasure Eater, as if under mutual agreement, halted their fight and chased after him. However, one of them was nigh depleted in magic, while the other had just recently recovered from a critical injury. Jin utilized all his sprint skills simultaneously while fully charging himself with the surrounding mana, and ran at an outrageous speed, so even a level 7 elite wouldn't be able to catch up easily. The rebellion skill is really amazing. More running, less talking. Shin Woo's rebellion skill was at level 3. And whenever the rebellion skill leveled up, its effect would increase by 2%. That 2% definitely wasn't something to laugh about. His stats, which were passively increased for no other reason than the fact that he was a skeleton, had gone from a 10% increase to a 14% increase. And the increase from fighting a high-leveled enemy right now was also 14%. He also gained another 9% because he was with his partner, which totaled a stat bonus of 37%. That entire effect was likewise applied to his partner, Jin, as well. You're good at running away. Stop right there, Kayak. Of course, when the Lightning Shadow General and the Treasure Eater had fully recovered, they should be able to catch Jin eventually, but they wouldn't be running away forever, so it was okay. That's right, soon. He could see it. No, you can't. Don't stick that in my body. Guak. They passed the dense forest, arriving at the vacant lot and were greeted by the happy faces of the golem chimeras. Thousands of golem chimeras were rolling on the floor and were letting out such agonized cries that a weak-hearted man might faint on arrival. Like I thought, they're still like this. You bastards, I've finally caught. Immediately after they arrived at their destination, the vacant lot, Hansen von Dorth drew close, and was momentarily speechless when he saw that there were people here before him. The golem chimeras looked so horrendous that even he, who had witnessed countless monsters before, felt queasy, but it felt like he'd seen them somewhere before. Gwa, tch, you annoying bastard. But when it felt like he'd found a clue, the treasure eater rushed into the lot and attacked Hansen, so he couldn't afford to be immersed in his thoughts any longer. There were probably several reasons that the treasure eater attacked Hansen first, rather than its target, Shin Woo, but the primary reason was that it needed to take care of the dangerous one first and then it would be able to eat at its leisure. Goo, you dull monster, you were used by that skeleton too. Guak. Obviously, speech didn't work against a monster. Hansen gritted his teeth and faced the treasure eater. Hansen knew that he needed to take down the treasure eater as quickly as possible, as he didn't know when Shin Woo would start running again. However, Shin Woo didn't run away. This was his destination. The golem chimeras right before their eyes were his targets. He slightly straightened his neck out and steeled himself, activating the acting skill, the disguise skill, and the instigate skill simultaneously. Effectiveness of each skill increases exponentially. Then, the moment he got back onto the stage, you guys, Shin Woo's voice caused Jin to tilt his head. That definitely wasn't Shin Woo's original voice. If that's the case, where did he hear it before? He definitely recalled hearing it before from somewhere, but he didn't know from where. How long are you going to act so pitifully? That voice? The low and dignified voice. Strangely, the golem chimeras, which had been rolling around till now, responded to that voice. They stopped rolling around and flinched, but it was shocking compared to before, when they ignored any and all external stimuli. Wait, you, that voice? Kuok, you bastard, are you serious? What's worse, the Lightning Shadow General, Hansen von Dorth, reacted as well. Of course, the treasure eater attacked immediately after, taking advantage of his lapse in attention, which forced the general to focus on the fight once more. When Jin saw that, he got a sense of who Shin Woo was imitating. That voice, is it Arama Steelworkers? Rise, you fools. Those who made you like this still live and walk this earth, so where do you think you're running off to? General, this voice is. That's right, Shin Woo was imitating Arama Steelworker's voice. Of course, he never acquired records of Arama Steelworker, but he had some experiences with him, albeit indirectly, so he could imitate him, just not perfectly. Though his impersonation didn't need to be perfect. He just wanted to wake them up, and drag their conscious minds to the surface. That much was enough of a success. Our revenge? Revenge? On whom? As expected, Arama Steelworker's voice affected them, and there were more and more chimeras that regained their cognitive functions. Seeing that, Shin Woo continued speaking even more passionately. The acting skill and the instigate skill harmonized together, and he infused his magic into his voice. The chimera's minds had dimmed from the shriek of the dead, and Shin Woo pieced together their egos through sheer will. It wasn't actually that hard. He who compelled your loyalty and sacrifice. The one who made you like this, despite knowing the experiment would fail. The Emperor still lives in the Empire. Why yes, the one who made us like this. Making us neither dead nor alive. But I'm still loyal to the Emperor. Yet he's the one who. That wasn't something Shin Woo should say, as he had pushed countless of Kadinan's undead to their deaths to sacrifice themselves for him, but unfortunately, the chimeras had no idea of what he did. What did your Emperor give you in exchange for your loyalty? He gave you that rotten flesh and a golem's heart. He does whatever he pleases with your loyalty, and when you had no further use to him, he even tried to discard you. You and the facility were buried. That's the truth. He's right, the Emperor didn't even ask me. Kook, Guuk. Of course, that might have not been the Emperor's intention at first. How would Shin Woo know what the Emperor was thinking at the time? But in any case, all of them came to the same end. The result. The only thing that matters is the result. When the process disappears, then the result is all that's left. You need not blame yourself or regret. Rise up and take your revenge. Take revenge on all of those who used you. He's right, we're in such pain, so why are they? I want revenge. I'll take my revenge. A portion of the once squirming chimeras rose up. Whether they were a golem or a corpse, their twisted faces were enraged. However, that wasn't enough for Shin Woo. He knew that he'd be able to make all of them rise. Rise up, take your revenge. Are your wills not the same? Hey, you're acting totally like a villain. Regain the spirit you thought long dead. Fill your empty hearts with your will. The will of revenge. Revenge? Revenge. He stopped talking with Arama Steelworker's voice now. To be more specific, he was Paul Zero speaking to his subordinates now. There was no reason to worry himself over his voice anymore. Shin Woo had awakened all of their egos, and the chimeras themselves began to motivate each other. What the hell is that bastard doing right now? Kuwak, kook, so you're giving it a last-ditch effort. Fine, I'll end you soon. While Shin Woo was diligently brainwashing the chimeras, Hansen was hard at work fighting against the Treasure Eater, and finally had a chance to win. He knew that the Treasure Eater possessed the ability to absorb lightning, so he was careful to stay far away except for the moment he attacked, and would cut the tentacles beforehand. He caused the Treasure Eater to steadily accumulate damage and then hit it with a large-scale attack skill. If he were an ally, Shin Woo would compliment him, saying it was a perfect attack. I need to turn it around. The Treasure Eater was already halfway dead. Noticing this, Shin Woo felt rushed. If he used the general to kill the Treasure Eater, it might become an achievement, but it would just be stealing the last hit after calling him all the way over here. He hastily yelled, "One of the Emperor's spies is over there. While you guys were floundering around in your own delusions, he's been living and enjoying life. Are you just going to leave him be? No, I can't. I can't forgive him. I'll make him experience the same despair we did." There were still some chimeras who were idling around, but there were also those who awakened early on and followed Shin Woo, causing others to follow suit. Shin Woo's voice, which goaded them with one single emotion, was way too enticing for those who had roamed around and lost everything. Take your revenge. I'll help you. I'll take my revenge. I'll take my revenge. Kua. But then, something shocking happened. One of the chimeras who had regained his mind seemed to grab a hold of one who hadn't yet, and his core radiated an extraordinary light. Following which, the core devoured its body. LV6 Chimera Golem, +1. Wait, I've seen that somewhere before. Shin Woo, that's suddenly happening everywhere. The high-leveled chimeras possessed a clearer ego than the lower-leveled ones, and they were the ones most affected by Shin Woo's voice. Then a few of those high-leveled chimeras began absorbing other chimeras. They didn't discriminate among a golem's core, a golem's body, or a human's body. Those absorbed would either disassemble into mana, or attach onto the surface of their bodies, increasing the respective golem's energy. Shin Woo could tell that that kind of fusion was only possible because of the cores, as he saw the cores radiating light. That's disgusting. They're in the process of, forcefully, inheriting their comrades' wills. It's such a cool sight. There were definitely thousands of chimeras at the beginning, but their numbers had dwindled sharply as the fusions occurred everywhere. Shin Woo could guess what would happen next, and as he expected, there was a sudden surge of black light from the middle of the crowd. LV6 Chimera Avenger, Elite. LV6 Chimera Avenger, Elite. Whenever light flashed, the chimeras would absorb dozens of their comrades and would be reborn as Chimera Avengers. Instead of rotten pieces of flesh, they had gained proper bodies as elites. Countless cores, golem bodies, and night corpses were fused into one, and the chimeras were reborn as elites. Their once rotten bodies didn't look as bad as before because in the process of their rebirth, their bodies reached a state of balance. Revenge? My just revenge. They possessed gray flesh, as though iron and flesh were fused together, and their pupil-less eyes were both red and black. Their backs and shoulders sprouting other arms was plenty bizarre, but it was much better than before, when they were a clump of bodies. One might believe they weren't even undead. After countless fusions, there were a total of 38 Chimera Avengers. The strongest amongst them stepped forward and faced Shin Woo. Information appeared above his head that only Shin Woo could see. LV7 Chimera Avenger, Elite. To think that one of them would reach level 7. He realized that he'd created something absurd once again and just smiled bitterly. But then, the level 7 Chimera Golem spoke in a subdued voice. What should we call you? There were several voices mixed into one, and made it seem foolish to even attempt to find the root of the voice. Hearing the voices of the golem assuming a no-nonsense pose, Shin Woo was inwardly in a cold sweat, yet replied extremely firmly. Paul Zero. The one who will bestow upon you your new name. Paul Zero. The level 7 Chimera Avenger repeated him, and nodded his head in satisfaction. Most of the other Chimera Avengers either had 4 legs or had another 2 arms coming out from their backs, but aside from his gray skin, or his pupil-less eyes, this Chimera Avenger looked no different from a giant human being. It looked so natural that it was unbelievable that it had been created through the fusion of dozens of night corpses and golems. Shin Woo felt jealous once more upon seeing its appearance. Could he become like that if he fused with something else? Then are you going to give us that thing now, a name? When those guys are taken care of. Indeed, I'll take care of them immediately. The level 7 Chimera Avenger nodded his head and quickly assumed a running position. Then, he gripped the spear that naturally came out of his hand. It seemed like there were some traces of being a golem after all. But it does seem like the cores were completely dismantled and absorbed. Regardless of whether one thinks they know how progression, evolution, and how to control of mana works, they really don't in this world. Though it had to be good, as things were going his way. Each golem assumed a running posture like the level 7 Avenger, and Shin Woo ordered them coldly. That guy over there, stop him, he's the Emperor's hunting dog. You don't need to risk your lives. You just need to keep him busy for a bit. Keeping him busy is good and all, but it doesn't matter if we take him down, right? No, absolutely not. Your priority should be to keep yourself safe. Are you going to stop after taking down just one hunting dog? Our goal is killing the Emperor, not dying here. Kook, the people who talk like that always end up coming back dead, so one can't afford to even joke around about that kind of thing. Shin Woo glared and ordered them once more. After seeing the Avenger agree and nod his head, he ran forward with the other Avengers. Kook, you insects, you dare know your place? The Emperor's hunting dog, pay for your sins. Revenge on the Emperor. As soon as the 38 Avengers entered into the fray, the once hectic battle turned into chaos. Hansen, who was about to corner the Treasure Eater, was forced into parrying dozens of swords coming at him whilst letting out his frustrations. The Treasure Eater didn't lose sight of that opportunity and attacked the general as well. You hybrids, huh? And who's the one who made us into hybrids? He's strong. Is this guy level 7? The level 7 Chimera Avenger definitely stood out. Because he had just recently evolved into a level 7, he was objectively much worse off in terms of stats than Hansen, but because the Treasure Eater, as well as the other Avengers were attacking and Hansen's attention was all over the place, he could certainly inflict damage onto him. You're just the beginning. We'll tell the Emperor someday as well, that he made the worst decision possible. This energy is, are you guys golems? How dare you refuse His Majesty's grace and betray him? How dare you speak of betrayal? Kawak. Everywhere, mana and armaments crashed into each other. The Chimeras threw caution to the wind and attacked recklessly, and Hansen couldn't respond to all of their attacks properly. On the other hand, the Treasure Eater had become relatively safe in comparison, and leisurely attacked Hansen. And that's exactly what Shin Woo had been waiting for. Nice. Now the Treasure Eater's not marked anymore. You sure act so carefree, like you knew that this was how it would turn out. No, I didn't, but I was hoping to get a similar result through numbers before. He's said it once, and he'll say it again. In this world, quality is much greater than quantity. There was a really satisfying result to Shin Woo. How could it not be? Since the Chimeras, which he'd thought would be consumables, could be used later on if he played his cards right. All of you, get lost. No matter what. We'll kill you no matter what. Qua. The Chimera Avenger's intervention caused the battle to turn into chaos instantly. Shin Woo pulled a drake horn lance towards him that was floating in the air, gripped it, and thoroughly surveyed his surroundings. Jin, who'd sensed that the end was fast approaching, turned his back hoofs into springs and prepared to charge. We're taking down the Treasure Eater first, right? Then when are we going? It's still a level 7 elite, so just taking it down like that seems wasteful. We're going right after it expends its energy and hits the Lightning Shadow General with a huge attack. Jin was speechless at Shin Woo, who spoke as though he saw the future, and he was sure that the Treasure Eater would have no choice but to follow the actions that Shin Woo described. The important part was how they would act following that attack. Shin Woo knew that he couldn't kill the Lightning Shadow General himself. Thus, while the Lightning Shadow General was temporarily paralyzed by the Treasure Eater's attack, Shin Woo would attack. No matter what's going on with the others, Shin Woo just needed to swoop in, kill it, and run out. So, Jin, the timing's really important. In that small moment when it attacks the Lightning Shadow General and turns around to me, we have to get the first hit in. Easy for you to say? Shin Woo. Jin, who had been complaining about Li Shin Woo's request, suddenly called for Li Shin Woo. Like Li Shin Woo had said, the Treasure Eater was channeling all its mana, and was about to release a huge attack on the Lightning Shadow General. You idiot, insignificant creature, even till the very end, you're in the palm of his hand. We won't let you get away. Grab him. The Lightning Shadow General had realized what the Treasure Eater was up to, and attempted to block it and counterattack, but the chimeras got in his way and he couldn't move as he'd liked. With one strike of his sword, Hansen cut one of the level 6 Avengers to pieces, but then, 2 other Chimera Avengers held onto his back, keeping him from moving. You insects. Kuwak. The moment he realized he had been caught, he channeled powerful lightning within his body and flung them away from him, but they had achieved their goal. In that extremely short moment following their skirmish, the Treasure Eater shot a mana shell from its giant mouth, striking true. Keuk. Now, Hansen screamed and passed out. Seeing that, the Treasure Eater cheered and turned around, but at that very moment, Jin kicked off the ground and ran. Ridiculous acceleration. It seemed as though Jin had almost reached light speed, albeit for just a moment. The Drake Horn lance in Li Shin Woo's hand seemed to radiate red, and turned into a single, giant black horn. Shadow Horn. Kayak. The moment of impact, the Drake Horn lance burrowed deep into the Treasure Eater's neck area. Li Shin Woo felt his shoulder and wrist holding the spear creak, unable to withstand the strain. It hurt so badly that Li Shin Woo wanted to just pop his arm out and throw it away. Of course, he wouldn't even have the time to regenerate it. Since the Treasure Eater, having taken a good hit from its prey, was infuriated, and was drawing its remaining mana to burn him to a crisp. Gugugok. But it won't work. Where was Li Shin Woo's lance? It was in the area where Hansen's lightning shadow technique had struck. Though it had absorbed Hansen's lightning and regenerated itself, it wasn't completely healed. That's where Li Shin Woo's mana-infused spear had pierced through. Melt away. That was enough to injure it, but Li Shin Woo revealed his hidden card. That was none other than his level 2 high-rank acid poison. The lance, which was filled to the brim with mana, exploded with acid poison and permeated the injured area. Guguak. The Treasure Eater leapt around, as it couldn't endure the awful pain from the poison seeping deep into its body. However, Li Shin Woo didn't stop there, since he still had 4 other Drake Horn lances that were fully charged. Eat another one. Kua. As if a guillotine fell, a Drake Horn lance vertically fell from the air and precisely pierced the area that Li Shin Woo had hit prior. He exploded the lance once again, and spread the acid poison throughout its body once more. Guryuruk. Though the Treasure Eater was a high-rank level 7 elite, it couldn't endure anymore. It had been too much for the Treasure Eater, as it had fought continuously without rest and its body had been injured. Upon finding Li Shin Woo, it had continuously rammed into the castle walls, destroyed 100,000 skeletons, fought against a general, and had its body pierced through once. The Treasure Eater remembered all these past events and rotten discharge welled in its eyeballs. Even though it just wanted the treasure, even though that treasure was right before its very eyes. You've done well, Steve. Guak. Li Shin Woo spoke calmly and opened his palm. The other 3 Drake Horn lances floating in the air burrowed into the Treasure Eater's body, side by side. He didn't even need to blow them up. With just that, the Treasure Eater had reached its limit. You have safely hunted a high-leveled foe using every dirty means possible. But so long as you do not take care of the other calamity that you called here, you will not be properly rewarded for this achievement. If you would like your actions to be legitimized, please defeat him as well. As he defeated the Treasure Eater, a tremendous amount of perium dropped, as well as 2 bones, plus, a shiny treasure popped out as well, but before he collected it, Li Shin Woo saw a message that spoiled the mood. Of course, he had somewhat expected this message, so Li Shin Woo didn't let that get to him and collected the loot. You have acquired 7,893,450 perium. You have acquired the LV7 Treasure Eater's jawbone. You have acquired the LV7 Treasure Eater's rib bone. You have acquired the sacrificial gate. Through bone reinforcement, the item is transformed. You have acquired the LV8 bone gate. You have acquired the title, Treasure Master. You can now more easily find all the treasure hidden in the world. The bone reinforcement skill has become LV9. All abilities related to the bone reinforcement skill have become stronger. What? He knew a treasure would come out of the treasure eater, but he didn't think that that treasure would increase in level through bone reinforcement. Moreover, a bone gate? This tiny bone is a bone gate? And with that in mind, he relaxed and checked the item. Bone gate, LV8, durability 1, 551,550 its. A treasure that allows one to create a gate leading to a designated area by sacrificing a bone. Currently, the possessor can only create gates leading to areas he is completely familiar with, and it is impossible for the possessor to cross dimensions. As the item is imperfect, the amount of people able to use the gate is significantly limited. As expected, it was an amazing item befitting the title of treasure. It was a transportation item that wasn't limited by distance. Moreover, its price was bone. Though he didn't know what its previous price was, he had plenty of bones. So for Shin Woo, it was essentially an insignificant price. You dirty son of a bitch! How dare you! You vulgar, wicked insect! How dare you covet what's not yours! The moment Shin Woo collected the loot from the treasure eater, he heard a loud yell from behind him. That was obvious the Lightning Shadow General, Hansen's voice, who had a huge role in taking down the treasure eater. However, Shin Woo didn't even look back and spoke. You guys can still fight, right? Of course. For revenge, more than half of the Chimera Avengers had fallen, but surprisingly, there were only a few who had died. Monsters boasted an odd life force that couldn't be seen from the outside. This was especially true for the level 7 Chimera, as its life force was extremely healthy while Hansen's body was damaged, albeit slightly. They quickly recovered and then, they extracted a new weapon and attacked Hansen. There was no one better at buying time. Nice. Then keep him busy for a bit. Jin, this is yours. Can you absorb it? Even if you can't, you have to. I wouldn't have had to absorb it if only one came out. First, he stored the bone gate into his inventory very carefully, and after quickly using bone reinforcement on Jin with the treasure eater's jawbone, Shin Woo absorbed the treasure eater's rib bone. Then, at that moment, reinforcing your partner, Jin Taylor, by consuming the LV7 treasure eater's jawbone. You have learned LV1 high rank lightning resistance. Magic has increased by 15. Reinforcing your rib bone by consuming the LV7 treasure eater's rib bone. Health and magic have increased by 20. Intermediate lightning has become LV8. High rank lightning resistance has become LV2. You have learned LV1 element absorption. Magic has increased by an additional 30. Guwa, precious, my precious, treasure eater. He'd obtained the final puzzles pieces to defeat one of the 12 generals. Though, that's a lie. Gwa, but you got what you wanted, right? Yeah, I got it, but... When Shin Woo and Jin were finished with their respective reinforcements and turned around, the Lightning Shadow General, Hansen von Dorth felt quizzical, even through the pain left behind by the treasure eater's attack and his anger towards Shin Woo. That guy, he feels different. It felt like Shin Woo's strength had changed from before he defeated the treasure eater. But that was impossible if he thought about it with common sense. All Shin Woo had done was take down a monster that he'd brought to near death, so he shouldn't have received much karma off of the kill. In fact, it seemed like it would be a negative karma to him instead. While he did acquire the loot the treasure eater left behind, there was no way he could change so drastically. There was no way they'd become stronger as the treasures it had dropped weren't related to combat. You're really tired too, right? Let's finish this, Hansen. You impudent bastard? But upon seeing Shin Woo's confident attitude, Hansen discarded any such inquiries. That strength, which seemed to have changed, felt like an empty boast to him. How dare a mere ant try to reach the heavens? He was still a lousy level 6, and though he possessed a fast horse, that was all. While Hansen was indeed weakened from the treasure eater's attack, he was still a high-rank level 7 general. The reason he looked weak was because the treasure eater hadn't been a good match for him. This simpleton hadn't even realized that simple fact and had become reckless. He would just cut him down with a single lightning sword strike. That's my line. I'll kill you with a single strike. The treasure eater, who wasn't affected by lightning, was already dead. Now there was no reason for him to hesitate using his lightning. Get lost, you insects. Quack. Revenge? Hansen paralyzed the chimeras that continuously bothered him through a powerful electric discharge, and swung his bastard sword crossways, pushing all of them away. With this, there would be none who could interfere with him, albeit temporarily. Who up? Hansen raised his bastard sword, charged with powerful lightning, and slashed downwards at Shin Woo, who was rushing towards him. The lightning sword attacked Shin Woo with the power to cut both mana and space. Seeing this, Shin Woo hastily blocked it with a manufactured sword, but the moment Hansen's attack and his sword clashed, the manufactured blade shattered into pieces and a horrific amount of lightning spread through his body. Kuhik, to take Heaven's fury head on, what a fool. You're just a greenhorn who doesn't know his place. Huh? Hansen chattered on confidently, yet the man he expected to be burnt to a crisp was surprisingly enduring it unscathed. Then again, he wasn't unscathed. Both shoulders were destroyed immediately, and a few of his ribs were broken as well. But the moment Shin Woo took damage, he began regenerating his body, and soon, his body was healed. That was like the treasure eater, which had absorbed his lightning and healed its body. What is that? Kook. He was taken aback by Shin Woo's appearance, as he resembled the treasure eater he had fought a short while ago, and was careless for just a moment. In that moment, Shin Woo aimed for that gap in his awareness and the drake horn lances flew one after another, burrowing into Hansen's stomach. Shin Woo had struck where the treasure eater's mana shell had hit him. How? Even if it's rotten, it's still a herring. The moment he saw an indication that Shin Woo was attacking, he instinctually swung his sword, but there wasn't just one lance, there were three. And the moment the general was sure of his victory, Shin Woo's shocking appearance unnerved him, and of the three remaining lances, the general was only able to cut down one. What's worse, the moment he split the lance in half, a foul acid poison spewed out, and attacked him. As his blade was a treasure, it didn't melt, but the powerful acid was enough to melt away the general's armor. I guess you didn't see Steve die, right? Tell me, you bastard. How did you stop my lightning? Shin Woo had regenerated his body in no time, and provoked him. But the moment the infuriated Hansen attempted to yell something, the two drake horn lances inside his stomach exploded simultaneously. It was an obvious sequence of moves. How foolish. The moment Hansen sensed an extraordinary flow of magic, he created a magical shield that blocked it, but he couldn't block the acid poison created through mana that was concentrated to its very limit. You dirty bastard! Hansen's armor and skin melted away, exposing the rotten flesh underneath, and spurted out rotten, black blood. His exterior had been damaged during the fight with the treasure eater, but not on the inside, but Shin Woo, who'd properly taken advantage of the opportunity, was able to see his hideous appearance as a result of his elemental attack. The injured region that was affected by the acid poison was especially severe. Because he'd been injured by a lower-level opponent, it was a bitter injury in many ways. As I thought, when it gets to the high rank level, it's effective against a general. That's only because I was weakened. It's all because of your dirty tricks. Not only was Shin Woo at a lower level, he remained unscathed after taking a direct hit from Hansen's lightning. He'd even injected acid poison into him through a ridiculous trick. I'll kill you. Shin Woo's provocation was truly effective. If he didn't tear that bastard to pieces, then he wouldn't be able to bear it. Hansen's eyes rolled back and drew upon his last remaining mana to activate Lightning Shadow. You mocked me long enough? Jin, can you do it? Nope, I can't. Not possible. Jin, who'd already confirmed that Lightning Shadow sharply increased Hansen's speed and reflexes, firmly denied Shin Woo. It was so merciless that it sounded heartless. Die, what? But it was okay. The Lightning Shadow General was only focused on Shin Woo right now. And that meant, the Emperor's hunting dog, you insects. After he'd activated his Lightning Shadow and was about to charge at Shin Woo, the Chimera Avengers attacked from behind. Of course, now that all of his abilities had improved significantly, even level 6 elites were mere flies to him, but the problem was the timing. Just maintaining this ability cost a tremendous amount of mana. Get lost. And who are you to decide that? That's our new lord. It was extremely simple for him to cut through the Chimera Avengers and move forward. However, the Avengers rushed at him, heedless of their own lives, and cutting through each and every Avenger got him closer to mana depletion. Ultimately, the Lightning Shadow General became hasty. As all the blood rushed to his head, he realized that he'd made a rash decision, and was now beginning to accept that fact. You bastards! You fools that cannot understand His Majesty's intent. Remember that despair. The final obstacle was the level 7 Chimera Avenger. His palm had become a giant shield and he assumed a defensive position. Hansen even witnessed his resolve, that he wouldn't let anything past him. That deep despair, that's what made us like this. Shut up. The lightning blade cut through the air once more. The giant and durable shield was cut into pieces in one fell stroke, while the Chimera Avenger sustained a deep injury and was powerlessly flung away. Though the Avenger had sustained a severe injury, he didn't die, and following that attack, the last remnants of the general's lightning shadow vanished from his body. However, there were no more obstacles in his path. Shin Woo was right in front of him. Yet, Shin Woo seemed unafraid and black goblin fire blazed in his eye sockets, as though he were ridiculing him. You don't have any more mana, right? So what? Hansen raised his sword and pointed it at Shin Woo. It was a stance that seemed to convey a heavy strength. Even if I don't any mana left, I'm still stronger and faster than you. My accumulated stats, as well as my level, are proof of that. So in any case, you're out of mana. Die. Shin Woo nodded his head and Hansen forcefully charged. In the connected state, Shin Woo urgently moved his body and managed to dodge it, but was unable to dodge it completely. A part of his arm was severed. It was truly a powerful strike Hansen could be proud of. I'll fight you like this for a little bit until I've replenished my mana. Perhaps you won't even be able to last that long. Krasia. As he dodged the general's sword strike, Shin Woo yelled boomingly. His shoulder was cut, and his lower jaw was a bit cut as well. One of his fingers went flying into the air. Even his hastily summoned lightning tooth was cut apart. Krasia. The unfamiliar name caused the Lightning Shadow General to furrow his brow. Was it the name of a technique? An item? If not, then a person's name. But aside from the scattered Avengers, no one else was here. Only he, the skeleton, and the horse covered in steel. But he thought of it as a bluff, and intended to cut off Shin Woo's mouth so that he couldn't talk anymore. He swung his sword once again, but at that moment, there was something that stopped him. Shin Woo struck with his sword and cut through a layer of skin. Kook. At that moment, he felt as though his movements were messed up, and attempted to swing his sword, but once again, his movements felt unnatural. He couldn't move very well, as if his joints were frozen stiff. Shin Woo took advantage of that opportunity and this time, his sword cut a part of his fingers. It wasn't a coincidence. Someone had made him like this. Moreover, his opponent, Shin Woo, was entirely unscathed. But then, who was it? Who? Hahk. Who? His head creaked and turned around. At the end of his sight, he saw a young girl beyond the testing facility's doors. She was much too beautiful and pure white, having the appearance of a girl in the winter. You really did it. I told you the request wouldn't be so difficult. So how many minutes do we have? 5 minutes. If we take into account other variables, then 3 at most. Okay. The winter girl spoke and Shin Woo replied to her. That meant they were working together. It was a fact that the girl was the one making his body like this. But how? A level 7 magician. Krasia cradled the eternal ice that was slowly rotating in the air, spoke briefly, and went back to being silent. It was as though that much of an explanation was enough. And in truth, it was enough. That girl cast such a powerful debuff on me? And that's the reason this skeleton got me to use up all my mana? The more powerful one's magic was, the less likely a debuff would affect them. Thus, debuffs were cast when one's opponent was weak, so that their success rate was at its highest. A debuff was especially effective when one's mana is depleted, and if that's the case, that meant that Shin Woo provoking him into using Lightning Shadow was all part of a bigger plan. Ha, ha ha. He was completely tricked. Hansen had thought that there was someone backing Shin Woo, but when he saw him commanding the chimeras, he thought it was Arama Steelworker. To think that a level 7 magician would appear at this time and cast a debuff on him from an unknown location. 5 minutes. You can only be so foolish. If I just survive for 5 minutes, I'll be able to kill you all. Are you an idiot? Shin Woo grinned and spoke. I prepared so much just to catch you. You don't think she's all I got, do you? To be honest, she was all he had left. If this didn't work, then he would have to be prepared to die a few times and fight. But Hansen was intimidated, as he'd experienced all those traps that Shin Woo had prepared, so this time, his lie was actually quite effective. I don't know who you guys are, but I'm one of the 12 generals, one recognized by the Emperor as the Lightning Shadow General, Hansen von Dorth. He gritted his teeth and tried to raise his sword with his unmoving arm, but as he was disheartened and debuffed, the sword's edge shook finally. Seeing that, Shin Woo grinned and likewise raised his weapon. His weapon soon changed into the shape of a lance, the weapon which first pierced through his body. I know, that's why I'm trying so hard to take you down. Shin Woo was filled with a powerful green acid. The moment Hansen saw that, he instinctually predicted his own death, but even so, he couldn't stop. That was the pride of one of the 12 generals. And for the first time in a long time, one of the 12 generals was killed. Shin Woo mercilessly attacked the Lightning Shadow General, whose entire body was frozen stiff. By the end of it, Shin Woo managed to pierce through his neck and kill him without dying once. I am, His Majesty, Shadow Horn, Kahik. He thought it might be a bit cowardly, but he nonetheless blew him away as the airborne ice crystals evaporated. Since the result is all that mattered, and the result that appeared right after was, you have hunted a member of the 12 generals, the LV7 Lightning Shadow General, Hansen von Dorth. All contributing heroes acquire 30 million perium, and all stats increase by 100. You have acquired 10 permits to God's secret shop. Proficiency in all combat-related skills has increased dramatically. The intermediate bursting thunder skill has become LV9. Strength and magic have increased by 10. The intermediate mana bone skill has become LV9. Magic has increased by 10. The intermediate shadow horn skill has become LV4. All stats have increased by 6. The intermediate command skill has become LV9. All stats have increased by 3. Intermediate ice has become LV4. Magic has increased by 5. The element absorption skill has become LV2. Magic has increased by 10. You can more effectively absorb energy from the elements that you possess. There was a stream of messages that appeared. All the skills that he used in battle, as well as those he hadn't used in battle, leveled up instantaneously for no other reason than the fact that he had defeated one of the 12 generals. The amount of stats he'd garnered from defeating the general, as well as the stats from his skill level ups, was enough to make his head hurt. But wasn't this good for him? There were still some messages remaining, notifying him of his growth. You are an excellent example of a joker. Even in a situation without allies, you faced a variety of enemies and managed to incite them and trick them. In the end, you won, fair and square. All stats have increased by 20. The Joker karma has become even stronger. The Joker's innate skills have grown. Accompanying this message was a notification that his acting skill leveled up to level 16, as well as his disguise skill leveling up by 2, up to level 6. He knew just how much these skills changed whenever they leveled up and was surprised, almost gaping in response. But thinking about it carefully, a general had stood upon his stage, so he should obviously gain this much. You have received God's grace. The invisible heart skill's maximum level has increased by 10. His achievement was rounded off by a present from God. When he thought about it, the quest he'd received from God, which was the quest to hunt undead heroes, increased the maximum level of invisible heart as well, but he'd only killed one undead hero. He'd fought against 2 of them, but he made one of them into his subordinate. This time, the maximum level of invisible heart had increased by 10, to a total of 111. So this means that my lives have increased by 11, huh? He thought about it suddenly, and realized that God's blessing was truly amazing. Shin Woo recognized that God rarely did things out of the kindness of her heart, and just decided to be happy about it. Shin Woo nodded his head, as Kraisha and Jin danced with joy from beside him. Though they weren't rewarded as much as him, he could tell that they were rewarded based on their contributions. But then, Jin suddenly yelled, Shin Woo, I'm going to level up. Ah, alright, it's not dangerous here anymore, so take your time. Jin had barely not reached level 6, and had acquired hundreds of stats as a reward from this battle, so it would be even stranger if he couldn't level up. Shin Woo vacantly watched as Jin was engulfed in a sphere of light and leveled up, whilst he neatly picked up the loot the Lightning Shadow General had left behind with his own 2 hands. To be honest, the Lightning Shadow General was considered an intermediate boss, so he thought it'd be nice if he dropped a bundle of loot, but it was quite cold-hearted. You have acquired 15,230,550 Perium. You have acquired the Byron Inner Map. You have acquired the LV5 Divine Lightning Sword. Through bone reinforcement, the item transforms. You have acquired the LV5 Thunderclaw, +5. You have acquired the LV7 Lightning Shadow General, Hansen von Dorothy's wristbone. Other than that, he saw an item that looked to be a bracelet possessing tremendous magic. However, Kracia had come over when he called without any complaints and had not only helped with the mission but had also contributed towards defeating the Lightning General, so he decided that this would be part of Kracia's share. This is a magic reinforcement accessory. It's extremely rare. Ah, was it? I thought he specialized in close combat, yet his magic was really high. As he thought, leaving that piece of loot as part of her share made her really happy. Shin Woo asked if she wanted him to change it through bone reinforcement, but she firmly shook her head. Yep, Kracia was someone who didn't like taking risks. It seemed possible, but we really beat one of the 12 generals. I knew it. If you're there, everything becomes dynamic, Shin Woo. My existence is dynamic, so it can't be helped. Kracia giggled and said. Shin Woo replied uninterested and examined the last remaining pieces of loot in his hands. First, the Byron Inner Map seemed to detail secret passageways and facilities within some inner city, but he didn't know where Byron was or what it was, so he stored it into his inventory for now. However, the rest was amazing. As expected, once they become a general, they have to be carrying a level 5 weapon. Ah, this bracelet is level 6, though. Please trade. Don't want to. Shin Woo suddenly felt regretful. However, Shin Woo used lightning, so even if she did accept his offer, he would have to back out. The original Divine Lightning Sword, and now the Lightning Claw, was definitely a treasure that would make the lightning lethal. He felt slightly burdened, as Kracia watched with bright eyes, yet he absorbed it without delay. Recording the LV5 Thunderclaw, +5's information into the bone armory. Strength and magic have increased by 20. The Lightning Tooth and the Thunderclaw's information have been mixed and have become a new weapon. The moment Shin Woo absorbed the Thunderclaw, he sensed an intense change within his insides, or more specifically bone armory, and shook. Of course, it would be lying to say that he wasn't looking forward to this. He'd absorbed another lightning element weapon, so if both of those weapons supplemented each other, he thought it might create a greater weapon. But to think it would mix the two weapons' info and create an entirely new weapon. Bone armory wasn't something separate from Shin Woo, it was an equipment storehouse within his body. Shin Woo felt a huge migraine coming on due to the intense reaction going on inside. His health, magic, and all of his skills were involved in creating this new weapon. Countless information that came from the outside would be combined, and ultimately, a weapon only he could wield would be created. One wouldn't be able to understand it at all from looking from the outside, but what he was doing was akin to a blacksmith's work. When I think about it, something like this happened before. That's right, the whip. The staff and the whip's info were combined, creating the bifurcated whip. However, it wasn't this intense of a reaction back then, and perhaps this weapon would be much greater than the whip. In other words, you can now summon the LV6 Breath of the Lightning God. The Bone Armory skill has become LV8. You can now summon 7 pieces of equipment at a time. Health and magic have increased by 10. Yeah, a level 6 weapon. As his vague wishes had come true, Shin Woo momentarily observed the weapon and remained completely still. He feared that if he took his eyes off the message, then the weapon would disappear into bubbles. But as time passed, the message automatically disappeared. Shin Woo sighed transiently and raised a hand. Of course, he knew that the Breath of the Lightning God's info was stored in the Bone Armory. Since all the weapon's info was meticulously recorded in his head, but he couldn't help the fact that his outstretched hand, which was to summon the weapon, was shaking. Shin Woo, I'm finished with leveling up. What are you doing? I guess he's going through some kind of ritual we don't know about. While he shook due to how moved he was, Jin and Kracia became really noisy. Shin Woo completely ignored them and concentrated. To be honest, he didn't really need to go that far, but he wanted to keep brooding over this item he'd created, but couldn't adjust himself to. Summon. After investing approximately 40% of his mana, it was 40% after improving his mana, so it was a truly considerable amount. The weapon appeared, revealing itself in all its glory. In many ways, its shape looked more like the Thunderclaw than the Lightning Tooth, as it was also a bastard sword. Oh, ooh, it's beautiful. The pommel was both sharp and black. The hilt was long and uneven, reminding him of a dragon's scales, while the guard took after the Lightning Tooth. And a large blue blade on top. The end converged into a sharp tip, and it seemed capable of both stabbing and slashing. From an outside view, it just looked like an extremely luxurious sword. The blade could be either bone or metal. Its sheen made it indistinguishable while also making it look distinctive, but Shin Woo was fascinated by the fearsome energy contained within, especially the electrifying lightning energy within the blade. The others reacted similarly. Is that the weapon you just absorbed, Shin Woo? No, it's not. It looks a lot stronger. It is a lot stronger. How's that possible? After he'd pried off Kracia, who would always stick to him and watch closely for any mana-related phenomenon, he called for the item's info. In the process of recreating the weapon, he'd figured out everything there was to know about it and planned it out, but he really wanted to see the official information on it. Breath of the Lightning God. LV6. Durability. 4, 304,300. Attack power. 1,200 to 1,550. Element. Lightning LV6. Option. Effectiveness of lightning element plus 50%. Active skill. Thunder arrow. Summon a lightning arrow in order to attack from long range. The more powerful the user's lightning and the more mana is infused, the more powerful the skill becomes. This was the first time he'd seen a weapon with an active skill attached. Of course, it wouldn't be very difficult for Shin Woo, who could use the lightning element, to create lightning arrows and shoot them, but it felt completely different when the skill was included with the weapon. Moreover, the skill becomes stronger as his lightning element becomes more powerful. This was an advantage that could only be seen in standardized skills. It was funny to say, but it felt like he'd finally attained an item that befitted a fantasy protagonist. I want to test it out, but I probably shouldn't right now. Shin Woo smacked his lips after he'd securely fastened his summoned sword to his waist. Because he'd infiltrated the city on arrival and had so much to do afterward, he hadn't been able to rest properly. He had struggled, as he had fought against the general face to face, even though Kracia had cast a debuff at the last minute. Even if he was just barely grazed by the general's sword, his arm would fly off and his ribs would be crushed, so regenerating it all was a pain. It had been a really good learning opportunity. A general isn't a general for nothing. What's wrong, Shin Woo? I forgot I said I'd look after those guys. He had completely forgotten about the chimeras and finally remembered after rejoicing over the loot. When he looked back, the chimera's avengers were laying on the floor exactly like before. They weren't dead? Don't kill off my subordinates as you please. Kracia tilted her head. After Shin Woo had smiled bitterly and replied, he walked over to the chimera who looked to be in the worst condition, the LV7 Chimera Avenger. He thought it might feel unsatisfied that he hadn't looked after him following the battle, but there was nothing but cheer coming from his face. Were we able to do our duty? Yeah, because of you, I was able to kill one of the Emperor's agents. Very good, your strength and your intellect. I've decided that you are good enough to serve as our lord. So, the Chimera Avenger spoke, not just one, but all of them simultaneously. It was a frightening sight, as only their heads turned to face him as their bodies remained on the floor. Now, please give us a name. All right, I'll give you one. Shin Woo nodded his head seriously and calmly spoke. Your name is Kai Paul. Kai Paul. Henceforth, I will be Kai Paul and serve you. Until the day we kill the Emperor, no even beyond that. Shin Woo's face didn't even hint at his true feelings as he nodded his head, firmly accepting Kai Paul's resolution. Kai Paul was deeply touched by his name, but Shin Woo couldn't tell him that the Kai was just short for Chimera. Aside from the 7 chimeras that had died in battle, Shin Woo named the remaining 31 chimeras Kai Paul to Kai Paul 31. Because they were already elites, they didn't evolve again, but surprisingly, their stats increased slightly, followed by a change in their information. Shin Woo was suddenly shocked at how much power a name held in this world. Even so, he hadn't planned on putting much effort into their names. So long as he could tell them apart, any name was fine. Kai Paul 31, you're the last one. I see, 7 of us died. It's more impressive that only 7 of you died against that ridiculous guy. He reinforced the weakest 7 Kai Pauls with the bones of the fallen chimeras, and used a portion of the bones he'd accumulated to heal their wounds. After healing them, the Kai Pauls looked at him as if he were a mother bird, and began to respect Shin Woo. As expected, you are indeed qualified to say that you will kill the Emperor. His power has changed since defeating the Lightning Shadow General. It's almost like he lives in a different world from us. One of the chimeras pointed out sharply, but Shin Woo ignored them. And he returned to the task he'd put off, as he had to take care of the chimeras. Absorbing the Lightning Shadow General's wrist bone. The Lightning Shadow General, a higher-ranked bone than even the Treasure Eater. He'd absorbed a giant's level 7 bone from the shop before, and while the giant was quite powerful, he was no match for either the Treasure Eater or the Lightning Shadow General. The reason his stats had increased so much was because he was just that weak at the time. Though he'd gotten quite a lot stronger since then, the Lightning Shadow General's bone may surprise him and increase his stats significantly. There may be a bit of a backblast, so keep an eye on me. You can count on me. So all I need to do is watch this woman so that she doesn't do anything strange to you, right? Jin, you really are a rude person. Shin Woo remained quiet, and felt a bit left out as he watched a horse and a person converse. As he was a skeleton, he wasn't thinking about getting a beautiful girl to like him, or to pursue a serious relationship, as there wasn't any reason to do so. But he didn't think he'd be beat out by Jin too, who was a skeleton horse. It seems like Shin Woo's thinking about something strange again. My condolences. Alright, bone reinforcement. Executing bone reinforcement by consuming the LV7 Lightning Shadow General, Hansen von Dorothy's wristbone. He ignored their chat and boldly executed bone reinforcement. The Lightning Shadow General's wristbone in his hand began to spark and disassemble, and was then absorbed into his body. At that moment, his mana momentarily transformed into pure lightning. Your interior energy has been activated to its very limit. The intermediate lightning element has become LV10, and has evolved into the high rank level. You can utilize lightning more naturally than before, and your resistance to it has been strengthened as well. Magic has increased by 30. His intermediate level 8 lightning element had leveled up twice in one go and had evolved into a high rank skill. Shin Woo knew how wide the gap between an intermediate level skill and a high rank skill was, and cheered at the improved quality of his lightning. But surprisingly, this was just a byproduct. Now bone reinforcement's usefulness would really come to play. You have acquired a skill with great success, as your affinity with the target is incredibly high. Strength has increased by 30 and magic by 45. Absorbing Hansen von Dorothy's experiences and memories more deeply. Shin Woo barely thought it might be him experiencing Hansen's memories, and then lost his consciousness then and there. When he opened his eyes, he was, surprisingly, in a world overflowing with life. There were flowers and grass growing in the lawn with flies flying in between. There were tables here and there, as well as delicious-looking food and drinks. Shin Woo was familiar with this kind of thing. This was a party. Hansen, are you nodding off again? No, I wasn't nodding off at all. What a smooth talker. He heard Hansen's young voice, who he'd fought just a short while ago, as well as a slightly older voice who was rebuking him. Shin Woo's consciousness was inside as Hansen raised his head. A spirited middle-aged man was there, and for some reason, he felt close. I'm not lying, Sir Sigald. More importantly, what about the guard in the west? You're Sigald. Of course he felt close. He'd heard so many stories about Sigald. However, Shin Woo felt somewhat strange. Sigald was the head of Anti-Skull, and was well aware that he was hostile towards the Emperor and his subordinates. Yet, Sigald was approaching Hansen, one of the 12 generals, with such intimacy, so he realized that this must be a time far in the past. It seems like Her Majesty, the princess, didn't like the party. She went back to the palace immediately. So, henceforth, I will be guarding His Majesty, the prince instead. It'd be nice if I could just return to the palace as well. Don't nod off until His Majesty orders your return. Yeah, Hansen replied briefly by nodding his head, but then raised his head and asked. Now that I think about it, the party isn't that big this time. Did the first princess come to the party today? Don't overstep. Yes, sir. But still, I think I'd be a suitable husband. Wei. Hansen barely avoided the formless energy that came from Sigald. And like Shin Woo always did when he experienced someone's memories through bone reinforcement, he engraved their fight into his memory. He thought they might be weaker, as this was so far in the past, but after watching their recent quarrel, it seemed like both Sigald and Hansen were in their prime. If I hadn't avoided this, my face would have been split apart. Seriously, why are you only like this to me? You've become stronger since you became a general, Hansen. Once you're done with your escort duty, shall we spar? That sounds good. This is my chance to see my future brother-in-law's skill. This time, flames shot up. Shin Woo had learned that Sigald's flames were different from the norm. On the other hand, Hansen was moving desperately in order to dodge them. From within Hansen, after Shin Woo had felt Hansen's mana rotating quickly and instantaneously turn into lightning, he nodded his head. As I thought, there was a reason I felt a bit of superfluousness in his movements. The lightning was indeed powerful, but contrary to Shin Woo, who transformed mana into lightning itself, Hansen would quickly circulate his mana through a special pattern before he transformed it to something that felt like lightning magic, and then used his skill. Though it was powerful, it was still inefficient. Originally, bursting thunder was a skill that had that same feel, and aside from Shin Woo, who could utilize the elements freely, most people probably used the elements like this. She's a saint. Then at least the second princess. Even while Shin Woo was organizing his thoughts regarding the elements, Sigald and Hansen continued to talk. It seemed as though Sigald's younger sister, the princess, was incredibly pretty, as Hansen held on persistently. She's still a priest. Our religious order doesn't forbid marriage. Who? Sigald's tone seemed to say, even after all this, he still doesn't understand, and he sighed magnificently. Then, he took a look around, and Hansen followed suit. They noticed people were gathering. In the center, there was a luxuriously dressed middle-aged man. Is this some kind of entertainment you've prepared for us? No, Your Majesty. It was just us joking around. I, the Crown Prince, will allow it. Show our guests just how great the swords of the Empire are. I understand, Your Majesty. It was an order from the Crown Prince, who he protected. He would have to fight against someone who he couldn't beat in front of all these people. Hansen was shocked, but on the other end, Sigald had already drawn his sword. What's worse, Sigald's eyes were big and bright, meaning that he was going to discipline him, a mannerless brat, for coveting his younger sisters. Come at me whenever, Hansen. Please stop glaring at me so strongly. This is a spar. I know, though occasionally, real sword spars result in casualties. Are you trying to kill me? However, there was already no way for Hansen to escape. Once the Crown Prince clapped his hands, men wearing impressive uniforms came running out, clearing the area, and creating a space for the match. Hansen sported expression looking as though he was a condemned criminal in an execution ground, and was forced to draw his sword. It is the sword that had become a part of Shin Woo, the divine lightning sword. To think I'd be able to experience a fight between generals. I've really hit the jackpot, haven't I? He'd acquired memories regarding a party that had nothing to do with the Empire's struggles, or even its secrets. So Shin Woo had been grumbling that he would have to stay put and just watch men and women talking the entire time, but he had no idea it would end up like this. If you're not attacking, then I will. He did his very best to focus on the current situation. He'd already killed Hansen, and it felt like he would never have to fight Sigald in the future. But it was quite a big deal that he was able to experience the battle between two big shots so clearly. If you're giving me the first move, then I'll gladly take it. Hansen said while turning his magic into lightning. He then charged at Sigald with a blinding speed. It was the same lightning shadow technique he'd used during their fight. This should be easy. Shin Woo definitely had talent in the ways of manipulating mana, so the moment he experienced it firsthand, he figured out the core of the technique. The goal of lightning shadow was to eliminate the boundary between the body and magic by rapidly circulating one's magic and expanding it through the interior of one's body. Right now, Hansen's body was akin to a thunderbolt. He was ridiculously strong and fast, to the point that he could face a level 8. Of course, not only did it consume an overwhelming amount of magic, but just using the technique would damage one's body. However, it was an incredible technique that took that into consideration and would momentarily increase one's power exponentially. You could probably use the skill the same way with another element, but it seems like the lightning element is most effective. Next would probably be wind. As expected, the lightning element was powerful. Shin Woo could understand how Hansen had become the Emperor's hitman, despite being level 7 amongst the generals. And at the same time, there was something he realized. If I become familiar with it here, then my lightning sprint might get stronger as well. Lightning sprint was a charged skill that was based on high-rank spirit arts. One's body would be engulfed in lightning and the skill would give its user overwhelming acceleration and destructive force. If lightning shadow was like changing the inner gloves, then lightning sprint was like changing the outer gloves. But at their core, the techniques were similar, so it didn't feel like it would be very difficult to learn both at the same time. And if he were to succeed as well, he would be able to use two skills with ridiculous synergy. After he'd created the Shadow Horn skill, he must have gotten a taste for fusing skills together, as Shin Woo wanted to study the skills immediately. However, using his skill, Hansen charged forward quickly, and Sigald charged as well, blocking Hansen midway. He easily deflected Hansen's blade and simultaneously kicked his stomach. Hansen spun his body and tried to respond with a kick of his own, but by then, the back of Sigald's blade forcefully struck Hansen's head. Dozens of moves had occurred within the blink of an eye, and ultimately, before the duration of lightning shadow ended. Hansen was on his knees. Kuyak, I lost. Even though Shin Woo had been experiencing the battle in Hansen's body, he still had no idea what had happened and how he had lost so badly. He would need to think back to this battle several times in the future. That's the secret technique you invented, right? It's certainly powerful and quick. However, your mind couldn't keep up with your body. That's why you can't beat me. Kuak, you're right, the party members applauded. Of course, the party members didn't really know what had happened, but they at least seemed to realize that Sigald had won overwhelmingly. Plus, Hansen had gone all out from the very beginning, yet Sigald hadn't even drawn his fire sword. As I thought, Sigald's a swordsman who specializes in fire. While Shin Woo nodded at the flowing memories, Sigald slightly laughed and extended his hand towards Hansen. I can't give you my little sister, but you have gotten stronger. I'm glad you're not my enemy, Sir Sigald. Who? Hansen grabbed Sigald's hand, stood up, and spoke. Sigald thought he was exaggerating and grinned. So long as I serve His Imperial Majesty, that will never happen. I promise you in the name of the House Redidane. I'll be part of the family soon anyway. You. Sigald twisted Hansen's hand and threw him aside. At that moment, Shin Woo's consciousness became faint. The rich and plentiful experience was finally drawing to a close. No, wait a sec. But Shin Woo, who was returning after acquiring combat experience and skill know-how, was shocked at something that Sigald had said. Redidane, is that what he said? At that moment, his consciousness faded. What terrible timing.